aviary.
I just don't understand, John Arnold said, speaking into the phone. I don't see the Rex, and I don't see Grant and the kids anywhere either. He sat in front of the consoles and gulped another cup of coffee. All around him, the control room was strewn with paper plates and half-eaten sandwiches. Arnold was exhausted. It was 8 a.m. on Saturday. In the 14 hours since Nedry destroyed the computer that ran Jurassic Park, Arnold had patiently pulled systems back online, one after another. All the park systems are back and functioning correctly. The phones are working. I've called for a doctor for you. On the other end of the line, Malcolm coughed. Arnold was talking to him in his room at the lodge. But you're having trouble with the motion sensors? Well, I'm not finding what I'm looking for. Like the Rex? He's not reading at all now. He started north about 20 minutes ago, following along the edge of the lagoon, and then I lost him. I don't know why, unless he's gone to sleep again. And you can't find Grant and the kids? No. I think it's quite simple, Malcolm said. The motion sensors cover an inadequate area. Inadequate? Arnold bristled. They cover 92% of the land area, I remember, Malcolm said. But if you put the remaining areas up on the board, I think you'll find that the 8% is topologically unified, meaning that those areas are contiguous. In essence, an animal can move freely anywhere in the park and escape detection by following a maintenance road or the jungle river or the beaches or whatever. Even if that were so, Arnold said, the animals are too stupid to know that. It's not clear how stupid the animals are, Malcolm said. You think that's what Grant and the kids are doing? Arnold said. Definitely not, Malcolm said, coughing again. Grant's no fool. He clearly wants to be detected by you. He and the kids are probably waving at every motion sensor in sight. But maybe they have other problems we don't know about. Or maybe they're on the river. I can't imagine they'd be on the river. The banks are very narrow. It's impossible to walk along there. Would the river bring them all the way back here? Yes, but it's not the safest way to go, because it passes through the aviary. Why wasn't the aviary on the tour? Malcolm said. We've had problems setting it up. Originally, the park was intended to have a treetop lodge built high above the ground where visitors could observe the pterodactyls at flight level. We've got 4 dactyls in the aviary now. Actually, they're pterodactyls, which are big fish-eating dactyls. What about them? Well, while we finished the lodge, we put the dactyls in the aviary to acclimate them. But that was a big mistake. It turns out our fish hunters are territorial. Territorial? Fiercely territorial, Arnold said. They fight among themselves for territory, and they'll attack any other animal that comes into the area they've marked out. Attack? It's impressive, Arnold said. The dactyls glide to the top of the aviary, fold up their wings, and dive. A 30-pound animal will strike a man on the ground like a ton of bricks. They were knocking the workmen unconscious, cutting them up pretty badly. That doesn't injure the dactyls? Not so far. So if those kids are in the aviary... They're not, Arnold said. At least I hope they're not. Is that the lodge? Lex said. What a dump. Beneath the aviary dome, Teratop's lodge was built high above the ground on big wooden pylons in the middle of a stand of fir trees. But the building was unfinished and unpainted. The windows were boarded up. The trees and the lodge were splattered with broad white streaks. I guess they didn't finish it for some reason, Grant said, hiding his disappointment. He glanced at his watch. Come on, let's go back to the boat. The sun came out as they walked along, making the morning more cheerful. Grant looked at the latticework shadows on the ground from the dome above. He noticed that the ground and the foliage were spattered with broad streaks of the same white chalky substance that had been on the building. And there was a distinctive sour odor in the morning air. Stinks here, Lex said. What's all that white stuff? Looks like reptile droppings, probably from the birds. How come they didn't finish the lodge? I don't know. They entered a clearing of low grass dotted with wildflowers. They heard a long, low whistle, then an answering whistle from across the forest. What's that? I don't know. Then Grant saw the dark shadow of a cloud on the grassy field ahead. The shadow was moving fast. In moments it had swept over them. He looked up and saw an enormous dark shape gliding above them, blotting out the sun. Yow! Lex said. Is it a pterodactyl? Yes, Tim said. Grant didn't answer. He was entranced by the sight of the huge flying creature. In the sky above, the pterodactyl gave a low whistle and wheeled gracefully, turning back toward them. How come they're not on the tour? Tim said. Grant was wondering the same thing. The flying dinosaurs were so beautiful, so graceful as they moved through the air. As Grant watched, he saw a second pterodactyl appear in the sky, and a third, and a fourth. Maybe because they didn't finish the lodge, Lex said. Grant was thinking these weren't ordinary pterodactyls. They were too large. They must be pterodactyls, big flying reptiles from the early Cretaceous. When they were high, these looked like small airplanes. When they came lower, he could see the animals had 15-foot wingspans, furry bodies, and heads like crocodiles. They ate fish, he remembered. South America and Mexico. Lex shaded her eyes and looked up at the sky. Can they hurt us? I don't think so. They eat fish. One of the dactyls spiraled down, a flashing dark shadow that whooshed past them with a rush of warm air and a lingering sour odor. Wow, Lex said. They're really big. And then she said, are you sure they can't hurt us? Pretty sure. A second dactyl swooped down, moving faster than the first. It came from behind, streaked over their heads. Grant had a glimpse of its toothy beak and the furry body. It looked like a huge bat, he thought. But Grant was impressed with the frail appearance of the animals. Their huge wingspans, the delicate pink membranes stretched across them, so thin they were translucent, everything reinforced the delicacy of the dactyls. Ow! Lex shouted, grabbing her hair. He bit me! He what? Grant said. He bit me! He bit me! When she took her hand away, he saw blood on her fingers. Up in the sky, two more dactyls folded their wings, collapsing into small, dark shapes that plummeted toward the ground. They made a kind of scream as they hurtled downward. Come on! Grant said, grabbing their hands. They ran across the meadow, hearing the approaching scream, and he flung himself on the ground at the last moment, pulling the kids down with him, as the two dactyls whistled and squeaked past them, flapping their wings. Grant felt claws tear the shirt along his back. Then he was up, pulling Lex back onto her feet, and running with Tim a few feet forward, while overhead two more birds wheeled and dove toward them, screaming. At the last moment, he pushed the kids to the ground, and the big shadows flapped past. Ugh, Lex said, disgusted. He saw that she was streaked with white droppings from the birds. Grant scrambled to his feet. Come on! He was about to run when Lex shrieked in terror. He turned back and saw that one of the dactyls had grabbed her by the shoulders with its hind claws. The animal's huge, leathery wings, translucent in the sunlight, flapped broadly on both sides of her. The dactyl was trying to take off, but Lex was too heavy, and while it struggled, it repeatedly jabbed at her head with its long, pointed jaw. Lex was screaming, waving her arms wildly. Grant did the only thing he could think to do. He ran forward and jumped up, throwing himself against the body of the dactyl. He knocked it onto its back on the ground and fell on top of the furry body. The animal screamed and snapped. Grant ducked his head away from the jaws and pushed back as the giant wings beat around his body. It was like being in a tent in a windstorm. He couldn't see, he couldn't hear. There was nothing but the flapping and shrieking and the leathery membranes. The clawed legs scratched frantically at his chest. Lex was screaming. Grant pushed away from the dactyl, and it squeaked and gibbered as it flapped its wings and struggled to turn over, to right itself. Finally, it pulled in its wings like a bat and rolled over, lifted itself up on its little wing claws, and began to walk that way. He paused, astonished. It could walk on its wings. Lederer's speculation was right. But then the other dactyls were diving down at them, and Grant was dizzy, off balance, and in horror he saw Lex run away, her arms over her head, Tim shouting at the top of his lungs. The first of them swooped down, and she threw something, and suddenly the dactyl whistled and climbed. The other dactyls immediately climbed and chased the first into the sky. The fourth dactyl flapped awkwardly into the air to join the others. Grant looked upward, squinting to see what had happened. The three dactyls chased the first, screaming angrily. They were alone. The dactyls immediately climbed and chased. What happened? Grant said. They got my glove, Lex said. My Daryl Strawberry's special. They started walking again. Tim put his arm around her shoulders. Are you all right? Of course, stupid, she said, shaking him off. She looked upward. I hope they choke and die, she said. Yeah, Tim said. Me too. Up ahead, they saw the boat on the shore. Grant looked at his watch. It was 8:30. He now had 2.5 hours to get back. Lex cheered as they drifted beyond the silver aviary dome. Then the banks of the river closed in on both sides, the trees meeting overhead once more. The river was narrower than ever, in some places only 10 feet wide, and the current flowed very fast. Lex reached up to touch the branches as they went past. Grant sat back in the raft, and listened to the gurgle of the water through the warm rubber. They were moving fast now, the branches overhead slipping by more rapidly. It was pleasant. It gave a little breeze in the hot confines of the overhanging branches, and it meant they would get back that much sooner. Grant couldn't guess how far they had come, but it must be several miles at least from the sauropod building where they had spent the night, perhaps 4 or 5 miles, maybe even more. That meant they might be only an hour's walk from the hotel once they left the raft. But after the aviary, Grant was in no hurry to leave the river again. For the moment, they were making good time.
I wonder how Ralph is,
Lex said.
He's probably dead or something.
I'm sure he's fine.
I wonder if he'd let me ride him.
She sighed, sleepy in the sun.
That would be fun, to ride Ralph.
Tim said to Grant,
Remember back at the Stegosaurus last night?
Yes?
How come you asked them about frog DNA?
Because of the breeding, Grant said. They can't explain why the dinosaurs are breeding, since they irradiate them and since they're all females.
Right.
Well, irradiation is notoriously unreliable, and probably doesn't work. I think that'll eventually be shown here. But there is still the problem of the dinosaurs being female. How can they breed when they're all female?
Right,
Tim said. Well, across the animal kingdom, sexual reproduction exists in extraordinary variety.
Tim's very interested in sex,
Lex said. They both ignored her. For example, Grant said, many animals have sexual reproduction without ever having what we would call sex. The male releases a spermatophore, which contains the sperm, and the female picks it up at a later time. This kind of exchange does not require quite as much physical differentiation between male and female as we usually think exists. Male and female are more alike in some animals than they are in human beings. Tim nodded.
But what about the frogs?
Grant heard sudden shrieks from the trees above as the microceratopsians scattered in alarm, shaking the branches. The big head of the tyrannosaur lunged through the foliage from the left, the jaws snapping at the raft. Lex howled in terror, and Grant paddled away toward the opposite bank, but the river here was only 10 feet wide. The tyrannosaur was caught in the heavy growth. It butted and twisted its head and roared. Then it pulled its head back. Through the trees that lined the riverbank, they saw the huge dark form of the tyrannosaur moving north, looking for a gap in the trees that lined the bank. The microceratopsians had all gone to the opposite bank, where they shrieked and scampered and jumped up and down. In the raft, Grant, Tim, and Lex stared helplessly as the tyrannosaur tried to break through again. But the trees were too dense along the banks of the river. The tyrannosaur again moved downstream ahead of the boat and tried again, shaking the branches furiously. But again it failed. Then it moved off, heading farther downstream.
I hate him,
Lex said. Grant sat back in the boat, badly shaken. If the tyrannosaur had broken through, there was nothing he could have done to save them. The river was so narrow that it was hardly wider than the raft. It was like being in a tunnel. The rubber gunnels often scraped on the mud as the boat was pulled along by the swift current. He glanced at his watch. Almost 9. The raft continued downstream.
Hey,
Lex said.
Listen.
He heard snarling, interspersed by a repeated hooting cry. The cries were coming from beyond a curve farther downriver. He listened and heard the hooting again.
What is it?
Lex said. I don't know, Grant said, but there's more than one of them. He paddled the boat to the opposite bank, grabbed a branch to stop the raft. The snarling was repeated. Then more hooting.
It sounds like a bunch of owls, Tim said.
Malcolm groaned. Isn't it time for more morphine yet?
Not yet,
Ellie said. Malcolm sighed. How much water have we got here?
I don't know. There's plenty of running water from the tap.
No, I mean, how much stored? Any? Ellie shrugged.
None.
Go into the rooms on this floor, Malcolm said, and fill the bathtubs with water. Ellie frowned. Also, Malcolm said, have we got any walkie-talkies? Flashlights? Matches? Sterno stoves? Things like that?
I'll look around. You planning for an earthquake?
Something like that, Malcolm said. Malcolm effect implies catastrophic changes.
But Arnold says all the systems are working perfectly.
That's when it happens, Malcolm said. Ellie said,
you don't think much of Arnold, do you?
He's all right. He's an engineer. Wu's the same. They're both technicians. They don't have intelligence. They have what I call thin intelligence. They see the immediate situation. They think narrowly, and they call it being focused. They don't see the surround. They don't see the consequences. That's how you get an island like this, from thin, intelligent thinking. Because you cannot make an animal and not expect it to act alive, to be unpredictable, to escape. But they don't see that.
Don't you think it's just human nature?
Ellie said. God, no, Malcolm said. That's like saying scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast is human nature. It's nothing of the sort. It's uniquely Western training. And much of the rest of the world is nauseated by the thought of it. He winced in pain. Oh, the morphine's making me philosophical.
You want some water?
No. I'll tell you the problem with engineers and scientists. Scientists have an elaborate line of bullshit about how they are seeking to know the truth about nature, which is true, but that's not what drives them. Nobody is driven by abstractions like seeking truth. Scientists are actually preoccupied with accomplishment, so they are focused on whether they can do something. They never stop to ask if they should do something. They conveniently define such considerations as pointless. If they don't do it, someone else will. Discovery, they believe, is inevitable, so they just try to do it first. That's the game in science. Even pure scientific discovery is an aggressive, penetrative act. It takes big equipment, and it literally changes the world afterward. Particle accelerators scar the land and leave radioactive byproducts. Astronauts leave trash on the moon. There's always some proof that scientists were there, making their discoveries. Discovery is always a rape of the natural world, always. The scientists want it that way. They have to stick their instruments in, they have to leave their mark. They can't just watch. They can't just appreciate. They can't just fit into the natural order. They have to make something unnatural happen. That is the scientist's job. And now we have whole societies that try to be scientific. He sighed and sank back. Ellie said, "Don't you think you're overstating? What does one of your excavations look like a year later?" "Pretty bad," she admitted. "You don't replant? You don't restore the land after you dig?" "No." "Why not?" She shrugged. "There's no money, I guess." "There's only enough money to dig, but not to repair." "Well, we're just working in the Badlands." "Just the Badlands," Malcolm said, shaking his head. "Just trash, just byproducts, just side effects. I'm trying to tell you that scientists want it this way. They want byproducts and trash and scars and side effects. It's a way of reassuring themselves. It's built into the fabric of science, and it's increasingly a disaster." "Then what's the answer?" "Get rid of the thintelligent ones. Take them out of power." "But then we'd lose all the advances." "What advances?" Malcolm said irritably. "The number of hours women devote to housework has not changed since 1930, despite all the advances. All the vacuum cleaners, washer-dryers, trash compactors, garbage disposals, wash-and-wear fabrics. Why does it still take as long to clean the house as it did in 1930? Ellie said nothing. "Because there haven't been any advances," Malcolm said. "Not really. 30,000 years ago, when men were doing cave paintings at Lascaux, they worked 20 hours a week to provide themselves with food and shelter and clothing. The rest of the time they could play, or sleep, or do whatever they wanted. And they lived in a natural world with clean air, clean water, beautiful trees and sunsets. Think about it, 20 hours a week, 30,000 years ago." Ellie said, "You want to turn back the clock?" "No," Malcolm said. "I want people to wake up. We've had 400 years of modern science, and we ought to know by now what it's good for and what it's not good for. It's time for a change." "Before we destroy the planet?" she said. He sighed and closed his eyes. "Oh dear," he said. "That's the last thing I would worry about." In the dark tunnel of the jungle river, Grant went hand over hand, holding branches, moving the raft cautiously forward. He still heard the sounds, and finally he saw the dinosaurs.
"Aren't those the ones that are poisoned?"
"Yes," Grant said. "Dilophosaurus." Standing on the riverbank were two Dilophosaurs. The 10-foot-tall bodies were spotted yellow and black. Underneath, the bellies were bright green, like lizards. Twin red curving crests ran along the top of the head from the eyes to the nose, making a V shape above the head. The bird-like quality was reinforced by the way they moved, bending to drink from the river, then rising to snarl and hoot. Lex whispered, "Should we get out and walk?" Grant shook his head no. The Dilophosaurs were smaller than the Tyrannosaur, small enough to slip through the dense foliage at the banks of the river. They seemed quick as they snarled and hooted at each other. "But we can't get past them in the boat," Lex said. "They're poisoned." "We have to," Grant said. "Somehow." The Dilophosaurs continued to drink and hoot. They seemed to be interacting with each other in a strangely ritualistic, repetitive way. The animal on the left would bend to drink, opening its mouth to bear long rows of sharp teeth, and then it would hoot. The animal on the right would hoot in reply and bend to drink in a mirror image of the first animal's movements. Then the sequence would be repeated exactly the same way. Grant noticed that the animal on the right was smaller, with smaller spots on its back, and its crest was a duller red. "I'll be damned," he said. "It's a mating ritual."
Can we get past them?
Tim asked. "Not the way they are now. They're right by the edge of the water." Grant knew animals often performed such mating rituals for hours at a time. They went without food. They paid attention to nothing else. He glanced at his watch. 9:20.
What do we do?
Tim said. Grant sighed. "I have no idea." He sat down in the raft, and then the Dilophosaurs began to honk and roar repeatedly in agitation. He looked up. The animals were both facing away from the river.
What is it?
Lex said. Grant smiled. "I think we're finally getting some help." He pushed off from the bank. "I want you two kids to lie flat on the rubber. We'll go past as fast as we can, but just remember, whatever happens, don't say anything. And don't move, okay?" The raft began to drift downstream toward the hooting Dilophosaurs. It gained speed. Lex lay at Grant's feet, staring at him with frightened eyes. They were coming closer to the Dilophosaurs, which were still turned away from the river. But he pulled out his air pistol, checked the chamber. The raft continued on, and they smelled a peculiar odor, sweet and nauseating at the same time. It smelled like dried vomit. The hooting of the Dilophosaurs was louder. The raft came around a final bend, and Grant caught his breath. The Dilophosaurs were just a few feet away, honking at the trees beyond the river. As Grant had suspected, they were honking at the Tyrannosaur. The Tyrannosaur was trying to break through the foliage, and the Dillos hooted and stomped their feet in the mud. The raft drifted past them. The smell was nauseating. The Tyrannosaur roared, probably because it saw the raft. But in another moment, a thump. The raft stopped moving. They were aground against the riverbank, just a few feet downstream from the Dilophosaurs. Lex whispered, "Oh, great." There was a long, slow scraping sound of the raft against the mud. Then the raft was moving again. They were going down the river. The Tyrannosaur roared a final time and moved off. One Dilophosaur looked surprised, then hooted. The other Dilophosaur hooted in reply. The raft floated downriver. Tyrannosaur. The jeep bounced along in the glaring sun. Muldoon was driving, with Gennaro at his side. They were in an open field moving away from the dense line of foliage and palm trees that marked the course of the river 100 yards to the east. They came to a rise, and Muldoon stopped the car. "Christ, it's hot," he said, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. He drank from the bottle of whiskey between his knees, then offered it to Gennaro. Gennaro shook his head. He stared at the landscape shimmering in the morning heat. Then he looked down at the onboard computer and video monitor mounted in the dashboard. The monitor showed views of the park from remote cameras. Still no sign of Grant and the children, or of the Tyrannosaur. The radio crackled. "Muldoon?" Muldoon picked up the handset. "Yeah. You got your onboards? I found the Rex. He's in grid 442, going to 443. "Just a minute," Muldoon said, adjusting the monitor. "Yeah, I got him now. Following the river." The animal was slinking along the foliage that lined the banks of the river going north. "Take it easy with him, just immobilize him." "Don't worry," Muldoon said, squinting in the sun. "I won't hurt him." "Remember," Arnold said, "the Tyrannosaur's our main tourist attraction." Muldoon turned off his radio with a crackle of static. "Bloody fool," he said. "They're still talking about tourists." Muldoon started the engine. "Let's go see Rexy and give him a dose." The jeep jolted over the terrain. "You're looking forward to this," Gennaro said. "I've wanted to put a needle in this big bastard for a while," Muldoon said. "And there he is." They came to a wrenching stop. Through the windshield, Gennaro saw the Tyrannosaur directly ahead of them, moving among the palm trees along the river. Muldoon drained the whiskey bottle and threw it in the back seat. He reached back for his tubing. Gennaro looked at the video monitor which showed their jeep and the Tyrannosaur. There must be a closed-circuit camera in the trees somewhere behind. "You want to help?" Muldoon said. "You can break out those canisters by your feet." Gennaro bent over and opened a stainless steel Halliburton case. It was padded inside with foam. 4 cylinders, each the size of a quart milk bottle, were nestled in the foam. They were all labeled Moro 709. He took one out. "You snap off the tip and screw on a needle," Muldoon explained. Gennaro found a plastic package of large needles, each the diameter of his fingertip. He screwed one onto the canister. The opposite end of the canister had a circular lead weight. "That's the plunger. Compresses on impact." Muldoon sat forward with the air rifle across his knees. It was made of heavy gray tubular metal and looked to Gennaro like a bazooka or a rocket launcher. "What's Moro 709? "Standard animal trank," Muldoon said. "Zoos around the world use it. We'll try 1,000 cc's to start." Muldoon cracked open the chamber, which was large enough to insert his fist. He slipped the canister into the chamber and closed it. "That should do it," Muldoon said. "Standard elephant gets about 200 cc's, but they're only 2 or 3 tons each. Tyrannosaurus rex is 8 tons, and a lot meaner. That matters to the dose." "Why?" "Animal dose is partly body weight and partly temperament. You shoot the same dose of 709 into an elephant, a hippo, and a rhino, you'd immobilize the elephant so it just stands there like a statue. You'll slow down the hippo so it gets kind of sleepy, but it keeps moving. And the rhino will just get fighting mad. But on the other hand, you chase a rhino for more than 5 minutes in a car and he'll drop dead from adrenaline shock. Strange combination of tough and delicate." Muldoon drove slowly toward the river, moving closer to the Tyrannosaur. "But those are all mammals. We know a lot about handling mammals because zoos are built around the big mammalian attractions. Lions, tigers, bears, elephants. We know a lot less about reptiles. And nobody knows anything about dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are new animals." "You consider them reptiles?" Gennaro said. "No," Muldoon said, shifting gears. "Dinosaurs don't fit existing categories." He swerved to avoid a rock. "Actually, what we find is that dinosaurs were as variable as mammals are today. Some dinos are tame and cute, and some are mean and nasty. Some of them see well, and some of them don't. Some of them are stupid, and some of them are very, very intelligent." "Like the raptors?" Gennaro said. Muldoon nodded. "Raptors are smart, very smart. Believe me, all the problems we have so far," he said, "are nothing compared with what we'd have if the raptors ever got out of their holding pen. I think this is as close as we can get to our Rexy." Up ahead, the Tyrannosaur was poking its head through the branches, peering toward the river, trying to get through. Then the animal moved a few yards downstream to try again. "Wonder what he sees in there," Gennaro said. "Hard to know," Muldoon said. "Maybe he's trying to get to the microceratopsians that scramble around in the branches. They'll run him a merry chase." Muldoon stopped the jeep about 50 yards away from the Tyrannosaur and turned the vehicle around. He left the motor running. "Get behind the wheel," Muldoon said, "and put your seatbelt on." He took another canister and hooked it onto his shirt. Then he got out. Gennaro slid behind the wheel. "You done this very often before?" Muldoon belched. "Never. Now try to get him just behind the auditory meatus. We'll see how it goes from there." He walked 10 yards behind the jeep and crouched down in the grass on one knee. He steadied the big gun against his shoulder and flipped up the thick telescopic sight. Muldoon aimed at the Tyrannosaur, which still ignored them. There was a burst of pale gas, and Gennaro saw a white streak shoot forward in the air toward the Tyrannosaur, but nothing seemed to happen. Then the Tyrannosaur turned slowly, curiously, to peer at them. It moved its head from side to side, as if looking at them with alternate eyes. Muldoon had taken down the launcher and was loading the second canister. "You hit him?" Gennaro said. Muldoon shook his head. "Missed. Damn laser sights. See if there's a battery in the case." "A what?" Gennaro said. "A battery," Muldoon said. "It's about as big as your finger. Gray markings." Gennaro bent over to look in the steel case. He felt the vibration of the jeep, heard the motor ticking over. He didn't see a battery. The Tyrannosaur roared. To Gennaro it was a terrifying sound, rumbling from the great chest cavity of the animal, bellowing out over the landscape. He sat up sharply and reached for the steering wheel, put his hand on the gear shift. On the radio he heard a voice say, "Muldoon, this is Arnold. Get out of there. Over." "I know what I'm doing," Muldoon said. The Tyrannosaur charged. Muldoon stood his ground. Despite the creature racing toward him, he slowly and methodically raised his launcher, aimed, and fired. Once again Gennaro saw the puff of smoke and the white streak of the canister going toward the animal. Nothing happened. The Tyrannosaur continued to charge. Now Muldoon was on his feet and running, shouting, "Go! Go!" Gennaro put the jeep in gear, and Muldoon threw himself onto the side door as the jeep lurched forward. The Tyrannosaur was closing rapidly, and Muldoon swung the door open and climbed inside. Go! Damn it, go! Gennaro floored it. The jeep bounced precariously, the front end nosing so high they saw only sky through the windshield, then slamming down again toward the ground and racing forward again. Gennaro headed for a stand of trees to the left, until in the rearview mirror he saw the Tyrannosaur give a final roar and turn away. Gennaro slowed the car. Jesus! Muldoon was shaking his head. I could have sworn I hit him the second time. I'd say you missed, Gennaro said. Needle must have broken off before the plunger injected. Admit it, you missed. Yeah, Muldoon said. He sighed. I missed. Battery was dead in the damned laser sights. My fault. I should have checked it after it was out all last night. Let's go back and get more canisters. The jeep headed north toward the hotel. Muldoon picked up the radio. Control? Yes? We're heading back to base. The river was now very narrow and flowing swiftly. The raft was going faster all the time. It was starting to feel like an amusement park ride. Whee! Lex yelled, holding onto the gunwale. Faster! Faster! Grant squinted, looking forward. The river was still narrow and dark, but farther ahead he could see the trees ended, and there was bright sunlight beyond, and a distant roaring sound. The river seemed to end abruptly in a peculiar flat line. The raft was going still faster, rushing forward. Grant grabbed for his paddles. What is it? It's a waterfall, Grant said. The raft swept out of the overhanging darkness into brilliant morning sunlight and raced forward on the swift current toward the lip of the waterfall. The roar was loud in their ears. Grant paddled as strongly as he could, but he only succeeded in spinning the boat in circles. It continued inexorably toward the lip. Lex leaned toward him. I can't swim! Grant saw that she did not have her life vest clasped, but there was nothing he could do about it. With frightening speed, they came to the edge, and the roar of the waterfall seemed to fill the world. Grant jammed his oar deep into the water, felt it catch and hold right at the lip. The rubber raft shuddered in the current, but they did not go over. Grant strained against the oar, and looking over the edge, saw the sheer drop of 50 feet down to the surging pool below. And standing in the surging pool, waiting for them, was the Tyrannosaur. Lex was screaming in panic, and then the boat spun, and the rear end dropped away, spilling them out into air and roaring water, and they fell sickeningly. Grant flailed his arms in the air, and the world went suddenly silent and slow. It seemed to him he fell for long minutes. He had time to observe Lex, clutching her orange jacket, falling alongside him. He had time to observe Tim, looking down at the bottom. He had time to observe the frozen white sheet of the waterfall. He had time to observe the bubbling pool beneath him as he fell slowly, silently toward it. Then, with a stinging slap, Grant plunged into cold water, surrounded by white boiling bubbles. He tumbled and spun and glimpsed the leg of the Tyrannosaur as he swirled past it, swept down through the pool and out into the stream beyond. Grant swam for the shore, clutched warm rocks, slipped off, caught a branch, and finally pulled himself out of the main current. Gasping, he dragged himself on his belly onto the rocks and looked at the river just in time to see the brown rubber raft tumble past him. Then he saw Tim battling the current, and he reached out and pulled him, coughing and shivering, onto the shore beside him. Grant turned back to the waterfall and saw the Tyrannosaur plunge its head straight down into the water of the pool at its feet. The great head shook, splashing water to either side. It had something between its teeth. And then the Tyrannosaur lifted its head back up. Dangling from the jaws was Lex's orange life vest. A moment later, Lex bobbed to the surface beside the dinosaur's long tail. She lay face down in the water, her little body swept downstream by the current. Grant plunged into the water after her, was again immersed in the churning torrent. A moment later, he pulled her up onto the rocks, a heavy, lifeless weight. Her face was gray, water poured from her mouth. Grant bent over her to give her mouth to mouth, but she coughed. Then she vomited yellow-green liquid and coughed again. Her eyelids fluttered. "Hi," she said. She smiled weakly. "We did it." Tim started to cry. She coughed again. "Will you stop it? What are you crying for?" "Because we were worried about you," Grant said. Small flecks of white were drifting down the river. The Tyrannosaur was tearing up the life vest. Still turned away from them, facing the waterfall. But at any moment, the animal might turn and see them. "Come on, kids," he said.
Where are we going?
Lex said, coughing. Come on! He was looking for a hiding place. Downstream, he saw only an open, grassy plain affording no protection. Upstream was the dinosaur. Then Grant saw a dirt path by the river. It seemed to lead up toward the waterfall. And in the dirt, he saw the clear imprint of a man's shoe, leading up the path. The Tyrannosaur finally turned around, growling and looking out toward the grassy plain. It seemed to have figured out that they had gotten away. It was looking for them downstream. Grant and the kids ducked among the big ferns that lined the riverbanks. Cautiously, he led them upstream.
Where are we going? Lex said. We're going back.
I know. They were closer to the waterfall now, the roar much louder. The rocks became slippery, the path muddy. There was a constant hanging mist. It was like moving through a cloud. The path seemed to lead right into the rushing water, but as they came closer, they saw that it actually went behind the waterfall. The Tyrannosaur was still looking downstream, its back turned to them. They hurried along the path to the waterfall, and had almost moved behind the sheet of falling water when Grant saw the Tyrannosaur turn. Then they were completely behind the waterfall, and Grant was unable to see out through the silver sheet. Grant looked around in surprise. There was a little recess here, hardly larger than a closet, and filled with machinery, humming pumps and big filters and pipes. Everything was wet and cold.
Did he see us?
Lex said. She had to shout over the noise of the falling water.
Where are we? What is this place? Did he see us?
Just a minute, Grant said. He was looking at the equipment. This was clearly park machinery, and there must be electricity to run it. So perhaps there was also a telephone for communication. He poked among the filters and pipes.
What are you doing?
Lex shouted. Looking for a telephone. It was now nearly 10 a.m. They had just a little more than an hour to contact the ship before it reached the mainland. In the back of the recess, he found a metal door marked Maint 04, but it was firmly locked. Next to it was a slot for a security card. Alongside the door, he saw a row of metal boxes. He opened the boxes one after another, but they contained only switches and timers. No telephone, and nothing to open the door. He almost missed the box to the left of the door. On opening it, he found a 9-button keypad covered with spots of green mold, but it looked as if it was a way to open the door, and he had the feeling that on the other side of that door was a phone. Scratched in the metal of the box was the number 1023. He punched it in. With a hiss, the door came open. Gaping darkness beyond, concrete steps leading downward. On the back wall, he saw stenciled, Maint Vehicle 04-22 Charger, and an arrow pointing down the stairs. Would it really mean there was a car? Come on, kids! Forget it, Lex said. I'm not going in there. Come on, Lex, Tim said. Forget it, Lex said. There's no lights or anything. I'm not going. Never mind, Grant said. There wasn't time to argue. Stay here and I'll be right back.
Where are you going?
Lex said, suddenly alarmed. Grant stepped through the door. It gave an electronic beep and snapped shut behind him on a spring. Grant was plunged into total darkness. After a moment of surprise, he turned to the door and felt its damp surface. There was no knob, no latch. He turned to the walls on either side of the door, feeling for a switch, a control box, anything at all. There was nothing. He was fighting panic when his fingers closed over a cold metal cylinder. He ran his hands over a swelling edge, a flat surface, a flashlight. He clicked it on, and the beam was surprisingly bright. He looked back at the door, but saw that it would not open. He would have to wait for the kids to unlock it. Meantime, he started for the steps. They were damp and slippery with mold, and he went down carefully. Part way down the stairs, he heard a sniffing and the sound of claws scratching on concrete. He took out his dart pistol and proceeded cautiously. The steps bent around the corner, and as he shone his light, an odd reflection glinted back. And then, a moment later, he saw it. A car. It was an electric car like a golf cart, and it faced a long tunnel that seemed to stretch away for miles. A bright red light glowed by the steering wheel of the car, so perhaps it was charged. Grant heard the sniffing again, and he wheeled and saw a pale shape rise up toward him, leaping through the air, its jaws open, and without thinking, Grant fired. The animal landed on him, knocking him down, and he rolled away in fright, his flashlight swinging wildly, but the animal didn't get up, and he felt foolish when he saw it. It was a velociraptor, but very young, less than a year old. It was about 2 feet tall, the size of a medium dog, and it lay on the ground, breathing shallowly, the dart sticking from beneath its jaw. There was probably too much anesthetic for its body weight, and Grant pulled the dart out quickly. The velociraptor looked at him with slightly glazed eyes. Grant had a clear feeling of intelligence from this creature, a kind of softness which contrasted strangely with the menace he had felt from the adults in the pen. He stroked the head of the velociraptor, hoping to calm it. He looked down at the body, which was shivering slightly as the tranquilizer took hold. And then he saw it was a male. A young juvenile, and a male. There was no question what he was seeing. This velociraptor had been bred in the wild. Excited by this development, he hurried back up the stairs to the door. With his flashlight, he scanned the flat, featureless surface of the door and the interior walls. As he ran his hands over the door, it slowly dawned on him that he was locked inside and unable to open it unless the kids had the presence of mind to open it for him. He could hear them, faintly, on the other side of the door. "Dr. Grant!" Lex shouted, pounding the door. "Dr. Grant!" "Take it easy," Tim said. "He'll be back." "But where did he go?" "Listen, Dr. Grant knows what he's doing," Tim said. "He'll be back in a minute." "He should come back now," Lex said. She bunched her fists on her hips, pushed her elbows wide. She stamped her foot angrily. And then, with a roar, the Tyrannosaur's head burst through the waterfall toward them. Tim stared in horror as the big mouth gaped wide. Lex shrieked and threw herself on the ground. The head swung back and forth and pulled out again. But Tim could see the shadow of the animal's head on the sheet of falling water. He pulled Lex deeper into the recess, just as the jaws burst through again, roaring, the thick tongue flicking in and out rapidly. Water sprayed in all directions from the head. Then it pulled out again. Lex huddled next to Tim, shivering. "I hate him," she said. She huddled back, but the recess was only a few feet deep, and crammed with machinery there wasn't any place for them to hide. The head came through the water again, but slowly this time, and the jaw came to rest on the ground. The Tyrannosaur snorted, flaring its nostrils, breathing the air, but the eyes were still outside the sheet of water. Tim thought, he can't see us. He knows we're in here, but he can't see through the water. The Tyrannosaur sniffed. "What is he doing?" Lex said again. "Shh." With a low growl, the jaws slowly opened, and the tongue snaked out. It was thick and blue-black, with a little forked indentation at the tip. It was 4 feet long and easily reached back to the far wall of the recess. The tongue slid with a rasping scrape over the filter cylinders. Tim and Lex pressed back against the pipes. The tongue moved slowly to the left, then to the right, slapping wetly against the machinery. The tip curled around the pipes and valves, sensing them. Tim saw that the tongue had muscular movements like an elephant's trunk. The tongue drew back along the right side of the recess. It dragged against Lex's legs. "Ew," Lex said. The tongue stopped. It curled, then began to rise like a snake up the side of her body. "Don't move," Tim whispered. Past her face, then up along Tim's shoulder, and finally wrapping around his head. Tim squeezed his eyes shut as the slimy muscle covered his face. It was hot and wet, and it stunk like urine. Wrapped around him, the tongue began to drag him very slowly toward the open jaws. "Timmy!" Tim couldn't answer. His mouth was covered by the flat black tongue. He could see, but he couldn't talk. Lex tugged at his hand. "Come on, Timmy!" The tongue dragged him toward the snorting mouth. He felt the hot, panting breath on his legs. Lex was tugging at him, but she was no match for the muscular power that held him. Tim let go of her and pressed the tongue with both hands, trying to shove it over his head. He couldn't move it. He dug his heels into the muddy ground, but he was dragged forward anyway. Lex had wrapped her arms around his waist and was pulling backwards, shouting to him, but he was powerless to do anything. He was beginning to see stars. A kind of peacefulness overcame him, a sense of peaceful inevitability as he was dragged along. "Timmy!" And then suddenly the tongue relaxed and uncoiled. Tim felt it slipping off his face. His body was covered in disgusting white foamy slime, and the tongue fell limply to the ground. The jaws slapped shut, biting down on the tongue. Dark blood gushed out, mixing with the mud. The nostrils still snorted in ragged breaths. "What's he doing?" Lex cried. And then, very slowly, the head began to slide backward, out of the recess, leaving a long scrape in the mud. And finally it disappeared entirely, and they could see only the silver sheet of falling water. Control. "Okay," Arnold said in the control room. "The Rex is down." He pushed back in his chair and grinned as he lit a final cigarette and crumpled the pack. That did it. The final step in putting the park back in order. Now all they had to do was go out and move it. Son of a bitch, Muldoon said, looking at the monitor. I got him after all. He turned to Gennaro. It just took him an hour to feel it. Henry Wu frowned at the screen. But he could drown in that position. He won't drown, Muldoon said. Never seen an animal that was harder to kill. I think we have to go out and move him, Arnold said. We will, Muldoon said. He didn't sound enthusiastic. That's a valuable animal. I know it's a valuable animal, Muldoon said. Arnold turned to Gennaro. He couldn't resist a moment of triumph. I'd point out to you, he said, that the park is now completely back to normal. Whatever Malcolm's mathematical model said was going to happen, we are completely under control again. Gennaro pointed to the screen behind Arnold's head and said, What's that? Arnold turned. It was the system status box in the upper corner of the screen. Ordinarily, it was empty. Arnold was surprised to see that it was now blinking yellow. Auxiliary power low. For a moment, he didn't understand. Why should auxiliary power be low? They were running on main power, not auxiliary power. He thought perhaps it was just a routine status check on the auxiliary power, perhaps a check on the fuel tank levels or the battery charge. Henry, Arnold said to Wu, look at this. Wu said, Why are you running on auxiliary power? I'm not, Arnold said. It looks like you are. I can't be. Print the system status log, Wu said. The log was a record of the system over the last few hours. Arnold pressed a button, and they heard the hum of a printer in the corner. Wu walked over to it. Arnold stared at the screen. The box now turned from flashing yellow to red, and the message now read, Auxiliary power fail. Numbers began to count backward from 20. What the hell is going on? Arnold said. Cautiously, Tim moved a few yards out along the muddy path into the sunshine. He peered around the waterfall and saw the Tyrannosaur lying on its side, floating in the pool of water below. I hope he's dead, Lex said. Tim could see he wasn't. The dinosaur's chest was still moving, and one forearm twitched in spasms. But something was wrong with it. Then Tim saw the white canister sticking in the back of the head by the indentation of the ear. He's been shot with a dart, Tim said. Good, Lex said. He practically ate us. Tim watched the labored breathing. He felt unexpectedly distressed to see the huge animal humbled like this. He didn't want it to die. It's not his fault, he said. Oh, sure, Lex said. He practically ate us, and it's not his fault. He's a carnivore. He was just doing what he does. You wouldn't say that, Lex said, if you were in his stomach right now. Then the sound of the waterfall changed. From a deafening roar, it became softer, quieter. The thundering sheet of water thinned, became a trickle, and stopped. Timmy, the waterfall stopped, Lex said. It was now just dripping like a tap that wasn't completely turned off. The pool at the base of the waterfall was still. They stood near the top in the cave-like indentation filled with machinery, looking down. Waterfalls aren't supposed to stop, Lex said. Tim shook his head. It must be the power. Somebody turned off the power. Behind them, all the pumps and filters were shutting down, one after another, the lights blinking off, and the machinery becoming quiet. And then there was the thunk of a solenoid releasing, and the door marked Mate 04 swung slowly open. Grant stepped out, blinking in the light, and said, Good work, kids. You got the door open. We didn't do anything, Lex said. The power went out, Tim said. Never mind that, Grant said. Come and see what I've found. Arnold stared in shock. One after another, the monitors went black, and then the room lights went out, plunging the control room into darkness and confusion. Everyone started yelling at once. Muldoon opened the blinds and let light in, and Wu brought over the printout. Look at this, Wu said. You shut down at 5:13 this morning, and when you started back up, you started with auxiliary power. Jesus, Arnold said. Apparently main power had not been on since shutdown. When he powered back up, only the auxiliary power came on. Arnold was thinking that was strange when he suddenly realized that was normal. That was what was supposed to happen. It made perfect sense. The auxiliary generator fired up first, and it was used to turn on the main generator because it took a heavy charge to start the main power generator. That was the way the system was designed. But Arnold had never before had occasion to turn the main power off. And when the lights and screens came back on in the control room, it never occurred to him that main power hadn't also been restored. But it hadn't. And all during the time since then, while they were looking for the wrecks and doing one thing and another, the park had been running on auxiliary power. And that wasn't a good idea. In fact, the implications were just beginning to hit him. "What does this line mean?" Muldoon said, pointing to the list. 05 hours, 14 minutes, 57 seconds. Warning, fence status, NV. Operative, auxiliary power, AV09. "It means a system status warning was sent to the monitors in the control room," Arnold said, "concerning the fences. Did you see that warning?" Arnold shook his head. "No, I must have been talking to you in the field. Anyway, no, I didn't see it." "What does it mean, warning fence status?" "Well, I didn't know it at the time, but we were running on backup power," Arnold said. "And backup doesn't generate enough amperage to power the electrified fences, so they were automatically kept off." Muldoon scowled. "The electrified fences were off?" "Yes. All of them? Since 5 this morning for the last 5 hours?" "Yes. Including the velociraptor fences?" Arnold sighed. "Yes." "Jesus Christ," Muldoon said. 5 hours! Those animals could be out!" And then, from somewhere in the distance, they heard a scream. Muldoon began to talk very fast. He went around the room, handing out the portable radios. "Mr. Arnold is going to the maintenance shed to turn on main power. Dr. Wu, stay in the control room. You're the only other one who can work the computers. And Mr. Hammond, go back to the lodge. Don't argue with me. Go. Now, lock the gates and stay behind them until you hear from me. I'll help Arnold deal with the raptors." He turned to Gennaro. "Like to live dangerously again?" "Not really," Gennaro said. He was very pale. "Fine, then go with the others to the lodge." Muldoon turned away. "That's it, everybody. Now move." Hammond whined. "But what are you going to do to my animals?" "That's not really the question, Mr. Hammond," Muldoon said. "The question is, what are they going to do to us?" He went through the door and hurried down the hall toward his office. Gennaro fell into step alongside him. "Change your mind?" Muldoon growled. "You'll need help," Gennaro said. "I might." Muldoon went into the room marked Animal Supervisor, picked up the gray shoulder launcher, and unlocked a panel in the wall behind his desk. There were 6 cylinders and 6 canisters. "The thing about these damn dinos," Muldoon said, "is that they have distributed nervous systems. They don't die fast, even with a direct hit to the brain. And they're built solidly. Thick ribs make a shot to the heart dicey. And they're difficult to cripple in the legs or hindquarters. Slow bleeders, slow to die." He was opening the cylinders one after another and dropping in the canisters. He tossed a thick webbed belt to Gennaro. "Put that on." Gennaro tightened the belt, and Muldoon passed him the shells. "About all we can hope to do is blow them apart. Unfortunately, we've only got 6 shells here. There's 8 raptors in that fenced compound. Let's go. Stay close. You have the shells." Muldoon went out and ran along the hallway, looking down over the balcony to the path leading toward the maintenance shed. Gennaro was puffing alongside him. They got to the ground floor and went out to the glass doors, and Muldoon stopped. Arnold was standing with his back to the maintenance shed. 3 raptors approached him. Arnold had picked up a stick, and he was waving it at them, shouting. The raptors fanned out as they came closer, one staying in the center, the other 2 moving to each side, coordinated, smooth. Gennaro shivered. Pack behavior. Muldoon was already crouching, setting the launcher on his shoulder. "Load," he said. Gennaro slipped the shell in the back of the launcher. There was an electric sizzle. Nothing happened. "Christ, you've got it in backward," Muldoon said, tilting the barrel so the shell fell into Gennaro's hands. Gennaro loaded again. The raptors were snarling at Arnold when the animal on the left simply exploded, the upper part of the torso flying into the air, blood spattering like a burst tomato on the walls of the building. The lower torso collapsed on the ground, the legs kicking in the air, the tail flopping. "That'll wake 'em up," Muldoon said. Arnold ran for the door of the maintenance shed. The velociraptors turned and started toward Muldoon and Gennaro. They fanned out as they came closer. In the distance, somewhere near the lodge, he heard screams. Gennaro said, "This could be a disaster." "Load," Muldoon said. Henry Wu heard the explosions and looked toward the door of the control room. He circled around the consoles, then paused. He wanted to go out, but he knew he should stay in the room. If Arnold was able to get the power back on, if only for a minute, then Wu could restart the main generator. He had to stay in the room. He heard someone screaming. It sounded like Muldoon. Muldoon felt a wrenching pain in his ankle, tumbled down an embankment and hit the ground, running. Looking back, he saw Gennaro running in the other direction, into the forest. The Raptors were ignoring Gennaro, but pursuing Muldoon. They were now less than 20 yards away. Muldoon screamed at the top of his lungs as he ran, wondering vaguely where the hell he could go, because he knew he had perhaps 10 seconds before they got him. 10 seconds, maybe less. Ellie had to help Malcolm turn over as Harding jabbed the needle and injected morphine. Malcolm sighed and collapsed back. It seemed he was growing weaker by the minute. Over the radio, they heard tinny screaming and muffled explosions coming from the visitor center. Hammond came into the room and said, "How is he?" "He's holding," Harding said, "a bit delirious." "I am nothing of the sort," Malcolm said. "I am utterly clear." They listened to the radio. "It sounds like a war out there." "The Raptors got out," Hammond said. "Did they?" Malcolm said, breathing shallowly. "How could that possibly happen?" "It was a system screw-up. Arnold didn't realize that the auxiliary power was on, and the fences cut out." "Did they?" "Go to hell, you supercilious bastard!" "If I remember," Malcolm said, "I predicted fence integrity would fail." Hammond sighed and sat down heavily. "Damn it all," he said, shaking his head. "It must surely not have escaped your notice that at heart what we are attempting here is an extremely simple idea. My colleagues and I determined several years ago that it was possible to clone the DNA of an extinct animal and to grow it. That seemed to us a wonderful idea. It was a kind of time travel, the only time travel in the world. Bring them back alive, so to speak. And since it was so exciting, and since it was possible to do it, we decided to go forward. We got this island, and we proceeded. It was all very simple." "Simple?" Malcolm said. Somehow he found the energy to sit up in the bed. "Simple? Simple? You're a bigger fool than I thought you were, and I thought you were a very substantial fool." Ellie said, "Dr. Malcolm," and tried to ease him back down, but Malcolm would have none of it. He pointed toward the radio, the shouts and the cries. "What is that going on out there?" he said. "That's your simple idea. Simple. You create new life forms about which you know nothing at all. Your Dr. Wu does not even know the names of the things he is creating. He cannot be bothered with such details as what the thing is called, let alone what it is. You create many of them in a very short time. You never learn anything about them, yet you expect them to do your bidding, because you made them and you therefore think you own them. You forget that they are alive. They have an intelligence of their own, and they may not do your bidding. And you forget how little you know about them, how incompetent you are to do the things that you so frivolously call simple. Dear God!" He sank back, coughing. "You know what's wrong with scientific power," Malcolm said. "It's a form of inherited wealth. And you know what assholes congenitally rich people are. It never fails." Hammond said, "What is he talking about?" Harding made a sign indicating delirium. Malcolm cocked his eye. "I will tell you what I am talking about," he said. "Most kinds of power require a substantial sacrifice by whoever wants the power. There is an apprenticeship, a discipline lasting many years. Whatever kind of power you want, president of the company, black belt in karate, spiritual guru, whatever it is you seek, you have to put in the time, the practice, the effort. You must give up a lot to get it. It has to be very important to you. And once you have attained it, it is your power. It can't be given away. It resides in you. It is literally the result of your discipline. Now, what is interesting about this process is that by the time someone has acquired the ability to kill with his bare hands, he is also matured to the point where he won't use it unwisely. So that kind of power has a built-in control. The discipline of getting the power changes you so that you won't abuse it. But scientific power is like inherited wealth, attained without discipline. You read what others have done, and you take the next step. You can do it very young. You can make progress very fast. There is no discipline lasting many decades. There is no mastery. Old scientists are ignored. There is no humility before nature. There is only a get-rich-quick, make-a-name-for-yourself-fast philosophy. Cheat, lie, falsify, it doesn't matter. Not to you or to your colleagues. No one will criticize you. No one has any standards. They are all trying to do the same thing, to do something big, and do it fast. And because you can stand on the shoulders of giants, you can accomplish something quickly. You don't even know exactly what you have done, but already you have reported it, patented it, and sold it. And the buyer will have even less discipline than you.
The buyer simply purchases the power like any commodity. The buyer doesn't even conceive that any discipline might be necessary.
Hammond said, "Do you know what he is talking about?" Ellie nodded. "I haven't a clue," Hammond said. "I'll make it simple," Malcolm said. "A karate master does not kill people with his bare hands. He does not lose his temper and kill his wife. The person who kills is the person who has no discipline, no restraint, and who has purchased his power in the form of a Saturday night special. And that is the kind of power that science fosters and permits. And that is why you think that to build a place like this is simple." "It was simple," Hammond insisted. "Then why did it go wrong?" Dizzy with tension, John Arnold threw open the door to the maintenance shed and stepped into the darkness inside. Jesus, it was black. He should have realized the lights would be out. He felt the cool air, the cavernous dimensions of the space, extending 2 floors below him. He had to find a catwalk. He had to be careful or he'd break his neck. The catwalk. He groped like a blind man until he realized it was futile. Somehow he had to get light into the shed. He went back to the door and cracked it open 4 inches. That gave enough light, but there was no way to keep the door open. Quickly, he kicked off his shoe and stuck it in the door. He went toward the catwalk, seeing it easily. He walked along the corrugated metal, hearing the difference in his feet, one loud, one soft, but at least he could see. Up ahead was a stairway leading down to the generators. Another 10 yards. Darkness. The light was gone. Arnold looked back to the door and saw the light was blocked by the body of a velociraptor. The animal bent over and carefully sniffed the shoe. Henry Wu paced. He ran his hands over the computer consoles. He touched the screens. He was in constant movement. He was almost frantic with tension. He reviewed the steps he would take. He must be quick. The first screen would come up and he would press... "Woo!" the radio hissed. He grabbed for it. "Yes, I'm here. Got any bloody power yet?" It was Muldoon. There was something odd about his voice, something hollow. "No," Wu said. He smiled, glad to know Muldoon was alive. "I think Arnold made it to the shed," Muldoon said. "After that, I don't know." "Where are you?" Wu said. "I'm stuffed." "What?" "Stuffed in a bloody pipe," Muldoon said. "And I'm very popular at the moment." Wedged in a pipe was more like it, Muldoon thought. There had been a stack of drainage pipes piled behind the visitor center, and he'd backed himself into the nearest one, scrambling like a poor bastard. Meter pipes, very tight fit for him, but they couldn't come in after him. At least, not after he'd shot the leg off one, when the nosy bastard came too close to the pipe. The raptor had gone howling off, and the others were now respectful. His only regret was that he hadn't waited to see the snout at the end of the tube before he'd squeezed the trigger. But he might still have his chance, because there were 3 or 4 outside, snarling and growling around him. "Yes, very popular," he said into the radio. Wu said, "Does Arnold have a radio?" "Don't think so," Muldoon said. "Just sit tight, wait it out." He hadn't seen what the other end of the pipe was like. He'd backed in too quickly, and he couldn't see now. He was wedged tight. He could only hope that the far end wasn't open. Christ, he didn't like the thought of one of those bastards taking a bite of his hindquarters. Arnold backed away down the catwalk. The velociraptor was barely 10 feet away, stalking him, coming forward into the gloom. Arnold could hear the click of its deadly claws on the metal. But he was going slowly. He knew the animal could see well, but the grill of the catwalk, the unfamiliar mechanical odors, had made it cautious. That caution was his only chance, Arnold thought. If he could get to the stairs, and then move down to the floor below... Because he was pretty sure velociraptors couldn't climb stairs, certainly not narrow, steep stairs. Arnold glanced over his shoulder. The stairs were just a few feet away, another few steps. He was there. Reaching back, he felt the railing, started scrambling down the almost vertical steps. His feet touched flat concrete. The raptor snarled in frustration 20 feet above him on the catwalk. "Too bad, buddy," Arnold said. He turned away. He was now very close to the auxiliary generator. Just a few more steps, and he would see it, even in this dim light. There was a dull thump behind him. Arnold turned. The raptor was standing there on the concrete floor, snarling. It had jumped down. He looked quickly for a weapon, but suddenly he found he was slammed onto his back on the concrete. Something heavy was pressing on his chest. It was impossible to breathe, and he realized the animal was standing on top of him. And he felt the big claws digging into the flesh of his chest. and smelled the foul breath from the head moving above him, and he opened his mouth to scream. Ellie held the radio in her hands, listening. 2 more Tikan workmen had arrived at the lodge. They seemed to know it was safe here, but there had been no others in the last few minutes, and it sounded quieter outside. Over the radio, Muldoon said, "How long has it been?" Wu said, 4 or 5 minutes. "Arnold should have done it by now," Muldoon said, "if he's going to. You got any ideas?" "No," Wu said. "We heard from Gennaro?" Gennaro pressed the button. "I'm here." "Where the hell are you?" Muldoon said. "I'm going to the maintenance building," Gennaro said. "Wish me luck." Gennaro crouched in the foliage, listening. Directly ahead, he saw the planted pathway leading toward the visitor center. Gennaro knew the maintenance shed was somewhere to the east. He heard the chirping of birds in the trees. A soft mist was blowing. One of the raptors roared, but it was some distance away. It sounded off to his right. Gennaro set out, leaving the path, plunging into the foliage. Like to live dangerously? Not really. It was true he didn't. But Gennaro thought he had a plan, or at least a possibility that might work. If he stayed north of the main complex of buildings, he could approach the maintenance shed from the rear. All the raptors were probably around the other buildings to the south. There was no reason for them to be in the jungle. At least, he hoped not. He moved as quietly as he could, unhappily aware he was making a lot of noise. He forced himself to slow his pace, feeling his heart pound. The foliage here was very dense. He couldn't see more than 6 or 7 feet ahead of him. He began to worry that he'd miss the maintenance shed entirely, but then he saw the roof to his right above the palms. He moved toward it, went around the side. He found the door, opened it, and slipped inside. It was very dark. He stumbled over something. A man's shoe. Gennaro frowned. He propped the door wide open and continued deeper into the building. He saw a catwalk directly ahead of him. Suddenly he realized he didn't know where to go, and he had left his radio behind. Damn! There might be a radio somewhere in the maintenance building. Or else he just looked for the generator. He knew what a generator looked like. Probably it was somewhere down on the lower floor. He found a staircase leading down. It was darker below, and it was difficult to see anything. He felt his way along among the pipes, holding his hands out to keep from banging his head. He heard an animal snarl and froze. He listened, but the sound did not come again. He moved forward cautiously. Something dripped on his shoulder, and on his bare arm. It was warm, like water. He touched it in the darkness. Sticky. He smelled it. Blood. He looked up. The raptor was perched on pipes just a few feet above his head. Blood was trickling from its claws. With an odd sense of detachment, he wondered if it was injured. And then he began to run, but the raptor jumped onto his back, pushing him to the ground. Gennaro was strong. He heaved up, knocking the raptor away, and rolled off across the concrete. When he turned back, he saw that the raptor had fallen on its side, where it lay, panting. Yes, it was injured. Its leg was hurt for some reason. Kill it! Gennaro scrambled to his feet, looking for a weapon. The raptor was still panting on the concrete. He looked frantically for something, anything, to use as a weapon. When he turned back, the raptor was gone. It snarled, the sound echoing in the darkness. Gennaro turned in a full circle, feeling with his outstretched hands, and then he felt a sharp pain in his right hand. Teeth! It was biting him! The raptor jerked his head, and Donald Gennaro was yanked off his feet, and he fell. Lying in bed, soaked in sweat, Malcolm listened as the radio crackled. "Anything?" Muldoon said. "You getting anything?" "No word," Wu said. "Hell!" Muldoon said. There was a pause. Malcolm sighed. "I can't wait," he said, "to hear his new plan." "What I would like," Muldoon said, "is to get everybody to the lodge and regroup. But I don't see how." "There's a jeep in front of the visitor center," Wu said. "If I drove over to you, could you get yourself into it?" "Maybe, but you'd be abandoning the control room." "I can't do anything here anyway." "God knows that's true," Malcolm said. "A control room without electricity is not much of a control room." "All right," Muldoon said. "Let's try. This isn't looking good." Lying in his bed, Malcolm said, "No, it's not looking good. It's looking like a disaster." Wu said, "The raptors are going to follow us over there." "We're still better off," Malcolm said. "Let's go." The radio clicked off. Malcolm closed his eyes and breathed slowly, marshaling his strength.
Just relax, Ellie said. Just take it easy.
You know what we are really talking about here, Malcolm said. All this attempt to control. We are talking about Western attitudes that are 500 years old. They began at the time when Florence, Italy was the most important city in the world. The basic idea of science, that there was a new way to look at reality, that it was objective, that it did not depend on your beliefs or your nationality, that it was rational. That idea was fresh and exciting back then. It offered promise and hope for the future, and it swept away the old medieval system, which was hundreds of years old. The medieval world of feudal politics and religious dogma and hateful superstitions fell before science. But in truth, this was because the medieval world didn't really work anymore. It didn't work economically, it didn't work intellectually, and it didn't fit the new world that was emerging. Malcolm coughed. But now, he continued, science is the belief system that is hundreds of years old. And like the medieval system before it, science is starting not to fit the world anymore. Science has attained so much power that its practical limits begin to be apparent. Largely through science, billions of us live in one small world, densely packed and intercommunicating, but science cannot help us decide what to do with that world, or how to live. Science can make a nuclear reactor, but it cannot tell us not to build it. Science can make pesticide, but cannot tell us not to use it. And our world starts to seem polluted in fundamental ways, air and water and land, because of ungovernable science. He sighed. This much is obvious to everyone. There was a silence. Malcolm lay with his eyes closed, his breathing labored. No one spoke, and it seemed to Ellie that Malcolm had finally fallen asleep. Then he sat up again, abruptly. At the same time, the great intellectual justification of science has vanished. Ever since Newton and Descartes, science has explicitly offered us the vision of total control. Science has claimed the power to eventually control everything through its understanding of natural laws. But in the 20th century, that claim has been shattered beyond repair. First, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle set limits on what we could know about the subatomic world. Oh, well, we say, none of us lives in a subatomic world. It doesn't make any practical difference as we go through our lives. Then Gödel's theorem set similar limits to mathematics, the formal language of science. Mathematicians used to think that their language had some special inherent trueness that derived from the laws of logic. Now we know that what we call reason is just an arbitrary game. It's not special in the way we thought it was. And now chaos theory proves that unpredictability is built into our daily lives. It is as mundane as the rainstorm we cannot predict. And so the grand vision of science, hundreds of years old, the dream of total control, has died in our century. And with it, much of the justification, the rationale for science to do what it does, and for us to listen to it. Science has always said that it may not know everything now, but it will know eventually. But now we see that isn't true. It is an idle boast, and foolish, and as misguided as the child who jumps off a building because he believes he can fly. This is very extreme, Hammond said, shaking his head. We are witnessing the end of the scientific era. Science, like other outmoded systems, is destroying itself. As it gains in power, it proves itself incapable of handling the power. Because things are going very fast now. 50 years ago, everyone was gaga over the atomic bomb. That was power. No one could imagine anything more. Yet a bare decade after the bomb, we began to have genetic power. And genetic power is far more potent than atomic power. And it will be in everyone's hands. It will be in kits for backyard gardeners, experiments for school children, cheap labs for terrorists and dictators. And that will force everyone to ask the same question. What should I do with my power? Which is the very question science says it cannot answer. So what will happen? Ellie said. Malcolm shrugged. A change. What kind of change? All major changes are like death, he said. You can't see the other side until you were there. And he closed his eyes. The poor man, Hammond said, shaking his head. Malcolm sighed. Do you have any idea, he said, how unlikely it is that you, or any of us, will get off this island alive? Sixth iteration. System recovery may prove impossible. Ian Malcolm. Return. Its electric motor whirring, the cart raced forward down the dark underground tunnel. Grant drove his foot to the floor. The tunnel was featureless except for the occasional air vent above, shaded to protect against rainfall, and thus permitting little light to enter. But he noticed that there were crusty white animal droppings in many places. Obviously lots of animals had been in here. Sitting beside him in the cart, Lex shone the flashlight to the back where the velociraptor lay.
Why is it having trouble breathing?
Because I shot it with a tranquilizer, he said.
Is it going to die? She said.
I hope not.
Why are we taking it?
Lex said. To prove to the people back at the center that the dinosaurs are really breeding, Grant said.
How do you know they're breeding?
Because this one is young, Grant said, and because it's a boy dinosaur.
Is it?
Lex said, peering along the flashlight beam. Yes. Now shine that light forward, will you? He held out his wrist, turning the watch to her. What does it say?
It says 10:15.
Okay. Tim said,
That means we only have 45 minutes to contact the boat.
We should be close, Grant said. I figure we should be almost to the visitor center right now. He wasn't sure, but he sensed the tunnel was gently tilting upward, leading them back to the surface, and... Wow! Tim said. They burst out into daylight with shocking speed. There was a light mist blowing, partially obscuring the building that loomed directly above them. Grant saw at once that it was the visitor center. They had arrived right in front of the garage.
Yay! Lex shouted. We did it! Yay!
She bounced up and down in the seat as Grant parked the cart in the garage. Along one wall were stacked animal cages. They put the velociraptor in one with a dish of water. Then they started climbing the stairs to the ground floor entrance to the visitor center.
I'm gonna get a hamburger and french fries, chocolate milkshake, no more dinosaurs, yay!
They came to the lobby, and they opened the door. And they fell silent. In the lobby of the visitor center, the glass doors had been shattered, and a cold gray mist blew through the cavernous main hall. A sign that read, "When dinosaurs ruled the earth," dangled from one hinge, creaking in the wind. The big tyrannosaur robot was upended and lay with its legs in the air, its tubing and metal innards exposed. Outside, through the glass, they saw rows of palm trees, shadowy shapes in the fog. Tim and Lex huddled against the metal desk of the security guard. Grant took the guard's radio and tried all the channels. "Hello, this is Grant. Is anybody there? Hello, this is Grant." Lex stared at the body of the guard lying on the floor to the right. She couldn't see anything but his legs and feet. "Hello, this is Grant. Hello." Lex was leaning forward, peering around the edge of the desk. Grant grabbed her sleeve. "Hey, stop that."
Is he dead? What's that stuff on the floor, blood?
"Yes."
How come it isn't real red?
"You're morbid," Tim said.
What's morbid? I am not.
The radio crackled. "My God," came a voice.
Grant? Is that you?
And then,
Alan? Alan?
it was Ellie. "I'm here," Grant said.
Thank God, Ellie said. Are you all right?
"I'm all right, yes."
What about the kids? Have you seen them?
"I had the kids with me," Grant said. "They're okay."
Thank God.
Lex was crawling around the side of the desk. Grant slapped her ankle. "Get back here." The radio crackled.
Where are you?
In the lobby of the main building." Over the radio, he heard Wu say,
My God, they're here.
"Alan, listen," Ellie said.
The raptors have gotten loose. They can open doors. They may be in the same building as you.
"Great. Where are you?" Grant said.
We're in the lodge.
Grant said, "And the others? Muldoon? Everybody else?"
We've lost a few people, but we got everybody else over to the lodge.
"And are the telephones working?"
No, the whole system is shut off. Nothing works.
"How do we get the system back on?"
We've been trying.
"We have to get it back on," Grant said, "right away. If we don't, within half an hour, the raptors will reach the mainland." He started to explain about the boat when Muldoon cut him off. "I don't think you understand, Dr. Grant. We haven't got half an hour left over here." "How's that?" "Some of the raptors followed us. We've got 2 on the roof now." "So what? The building's impregnable." Muldoon coughed. "Apparently not. It was never expected that animals would get up on the roof." The radio crackled. "Must have planted a tree too close to the fence. The raptors got over the fence and onto the roof. Anyway, the steel bars on the skylight are supposed to be electrified, but of course the power's off. They're biting through the bars of the skylight." Grant said, "Biting through the bars?" He frowned, trying to imagine it. "How fast?" Yes, Muldoon said. They have a bite pressure of 15,000 pounds a square inch. They're like hyenas. They can bite through steel and... The transmission was lost for a moment. How fast? Grant said again. Muldoon said, I guess we've got another 10, 15 minutes before they break through completely and come through the skylight into the building. And once they're in... just a minute, Dr. Grant. The radio clicked off. In a skylight above Malcolm's bed, the raptors had chewed through the first of the steel bars. One raptor gripped the end of the bar and tugged, pulling it back. It put its powerful hind limb on the skylight, and the glass shattered, glittering down on Malcolm's bed below. Ellie reached over and removed the largest fragments from the sheets. God, they're ugly, Malcolm said, looking up. Now that the glass was broken, they could hear the snorts and snarls of the raptors, the squeal of their teeth on the metal as they chewed the bars. There were silver-thinned sections where they had chewed. Foamy saliva spattered onto the sheets and the bedside table. At least they can't get in yet, Ellie said. Not until they chew through another bar. Wu said, if Grant could somehow get to the maintenance shed... Bloody hell, Muldoon said. He limped around the room on his sprained ankle. He can't get there fast enough. He can't get the power on fast enough not to stop this. Malcolm coughed. Yes. His voice was soft, almost a wheeze. What did he say? Muldoon said. Yes, Malcolm repeated. Can. Can what? Distraction, he winced. What kind of a distraction? Go to the fence. Yes, and do what? Malcolm grinned weakly. Stick your hands through. Oh, Christ, Muldoon said, turning away. Wait a minute, Wu said. He's right. There are only 2 raptors here, which means there are at least 4 more out there. We could go out and provide a distraction. And then what? And then Grant would be free to go to the maintenance building and turn on the generator. And then go back to the control room and start up the system? Exactly. No time, Muldoon said. No time. But if we can lure the raptors down here, Wu said, maybe even get them away from that skylight, it might work. Worth a try. Bait, Muldoon said. Exactly. Who's going to be the bait? I'm no good. My ankle's shot. I'll do it, Wu said. No, Muldoon said. You're the only one who knows what to do about the computer. You need to talk Grant through the startup. Then I'll do it, Harding said. No, Ellie said. Malcolm needs you. I'll do it. Well, I don't think so, Muldoon said. You'd have raptors all around you, raptors on the roof. But she was already bending over, lacing her running shoes. Just don't tell Grant, she said. It'll make him nervous. The lobby was quiet, chilly fog drifting past them. The radio had been silent for several minutes. Tim said, Why aren't they talking to us? I'm hungry, Lex said. They're trying to plan, Grant said. The radio crackled. Grant, are you... Wu speaking. Are you there? I'm here, Grant said. Listen, Wu said. Can you see to the rear of the visitor building from where you are? Grant looked through the rear glass doors to the palm trees and the fog. Yes, Grant said. Wu said, There's a path straight through the palm trees to the maintenance building. That's where the power equipment and generators are. I believe you saw the maintenance building yesterday? Yes, Grant said, though he was momentarily puzzled. Was it yesterday that he had looked into the building? It seemed like years ago. Now listen, Wu said. We think we can get all the raptors down here by the lodge, but we aren't sure. So be careful. Give us 5 minutes. Okay, Grant said. You can leave the kids in the cafeteria, and they should be all right. Take the radio with you when you go. Okay. Turn it off before you leave so it doesn't make any noise outside. And call me when you get to the maintenance building. Okay. Grant turned the radio off. Lex crawled back. Are we going to the cafeteria? She said. Yes, Grant said. They got up and started walking through the blowing mist in the lobby. I want a hamburger, Lex said. I don't think there's any electricity to cook with. Then ice cream. Tim, you'll have to stay with her and help her. I will. I've got to leave for a while, Grant said. I know. They moved to the cafeteria entrance. On opening the door, Grant saw square dining room tables and chairs, swinging stainless steel doors beyond. Nearby, a cash register and a rack with gum and candy. Okay, kids, I want you to stay here no matter what. Got it? Leave us the radio, Lex said. I can't. I need it. Just stay here. I'll only be gone about 5 minutes, okay? Okay. Grant closed the door. The cafeteria became completely dark. Lex clutched his hand. Turn on the lights, she said. I can't, Tim said. There's no electricity. But he pulled down his night vision goggles.
That's fine for you. What about me? Just hold my hand. We'll get some food.
He led her forward. In phosphorescent green, he saw the tables and chairs. To the right, the glowing green cash register and the rack with gum and candy. He grabbed a handful of candy bars.
I told you, Lex said. I want ice cream, not candy. Take these anyway. Ice cream, Tim. Okay.
Tim stuffed the candy bars in his pocket and led Lex deeper into the dining room. She tugged on his hand.
I can't see spec, she said. Just walk with me. Hold my hand. Then slow down.
Beyond the tables and chairs was a pair of swinging doors with little round windows in them. They probably led to the kitchen. He pushed one door open, and it held wide. Ellie Sattler stepped outside the front door to the lodge and felt the chilly mist on her face and legs. Her heart was thumping, even though she knew she was completely safe behind the fence. Directly ahead, she saw the heavy bars in the fog. But she couldn't see much beyond the fence, another 20 yards before the landscape turned milky white. And she didn't see any raptors at all. In fact, the gardens and trees were almost eerily silent.
Hey!
She shouted into the fog, tentatively. Muldoon leaned against the doorframe. I doubt that'll do it, he said. You got to make a noise. He hobbled out carrying a steel rod from the construction inside. He banged the rod against the bars like a dinner gong. Come and get it! Dinner is served! Very amusing, Ellie said. She glanced nervously toward the roof. She saw no raptors. They don't understand English, Muldoon grinned, but I imagine they get the general idea. She was still nervous and found his humor annoying. She looked toward the visitor building cloaked in the fog. Muldoon resumed banging on the bars. At the limit of her vision, almost lost in the fog, she saw a ghostly pale animal. A raptor. First customer, Muldoon said. The raptor disappeared, a white shadow, and then came back, but it did not approach any closer, and it seemed strangely incurious about the noise coming from the lodge. She was starting to worry. Unless she could attract the raptors to the lodge, Grant would be in danger.
You're making too much noise, Ellie said.
Bloody hell, Muldoon said.
Well, you are.
I know these animals.
You're drunk, she said. Let me handle it.
And how will you do that? She didn't answer him. She went to the gate.
They say the raptors are intelligent.
They are. At least as intelligent as chimps.
They have good hearing?
Yes, excellent.
Maybe they'll know this sound, she said, and opened the gate.
The metal hinges, rusted from the constant mist, creaked loudly. She closed it again, opened it with another creak. She left it open. I wouldn't do that, Muldoon said. You're going to do that? Let me get the launcher.
Get the launcher.
He sighed, remembering. Gennaro has the shells.
Well then, she said, keep an eye out.
And she went through the gate, stepping outside the bars. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely feel her feet on the dirt. She moved away from the fence, and it disappeared frighteningly fast in the fog. Soon it was lost behind her. Just as she had expected, Muldoon began shouting to her in drunken agitation. God damn it, girl! Don't you do that! He bellowed.
Don't call me girl,
she shouted back. I'll call you any damn thing I want, Muldoon shouted. She wasn't listening. She was turning slowly, her body tense, watching from all sides. She was at least 20 yards from the fence now, and she could see the mist drifting like a light rain past the foliage. She stayed away from the foliage. She moved through a world of shades of gray. The muscles in her legs and shoulders ached from the tension. Her eyes strained to see. Do you hear me, damn it? Muldoon bellowed. How good are these animals, she wondered. Good enough to cut off my retreat? There wasn't much distance back to the fence, not really. They attacked. There was no sound. The first animal charged from the foliage at the base of a tree to the left. It sprang forward, and she turned to run. The second attacked from the other side, clearly intending to catch her as she ran, and it leapt into the air, claws raised to attack, and she darted like a broken field runner, and the animal crashed down in the dirt. Now she was running flat out, not daring to look back, her breath coming in deep gasps, seeing the bars of the fence emerge from the haze, seeing Muldoon throw the gate wide, seeing him reaching for her, shouting to her, grabbing her arm and pulling her through so hard she was yanked off her feet and fell to the ground, and she turned in time to see first one, then two, then three animals hit the fence and snarl. Good work, Muldoon shouted. He was taunting the animals now, snarling back, and it drove them wild. They flung themselves at the fence, leaping forward, and one of them nearly made it over the top. Christ, that was close. These bastards can jump. She got to her feet, looking at the scrapes and bruises, the blood running down her leg. All she could think was 3 animals here and 2 on the roof. That meant one was still missing, somewhere. "Come on, help me," Muldoon said. "Let's keep him interested." Grant left the visitor center and moved quickly forward into the mist. He found the path among the palm trees and followed it north. Up ahead, the rectangular maintenance shed emerged from the fog. There was no door that he could see at all. He walked on around the corner. At the back, screened by planting, Grant saw a concrete loading dock for trucks. He scrambled up to face a vertical, rolling door of corrugated steel. It was locked. He jumped down again and continued around the building. Farther ahead to his right, Grant saw an ordinary door. It was propped open with a man's shoe. Grant stepped inside and squinted in the darkness. He listened. Heard nothing. He picked up his radio and turned it on. "This is Grant," he said. "I'm inside." Wu looked up at the skylight. The 2 raptors still peered down into Malcolm's room, but they seemed distracted by the noises outside. He went to the lodge window. Outside, the 3 velociraptors continued to charge the fence. Ellie was running back and forth safely behind the bars, but the raptors no longer seemed to be seriously trying to get her. Now they almost seemed to be playing, circling back from the fence, rearing up and snarling, then dropping down low to circle again and finally charge. Their behavior had taken on the distinct quality of display rather than serious attack. "Like birds," Muldoon said, "putting on a show." Wu nodded. "They're intelligent. They see they can't get her. They're not really trying." The radio crackled. "Side." Wu gripped the radio. "Say again, Dr. Grant?" "I'm inside," Grant said. "Dr. Grant, you're in the maintenance building?" "Yes," Grant said, and he added, "Maybe you should call me Alan." "All right, Alan, if you're standing just inside the east door, you see a lot of pipes and tubing." Wu closed his eyes, visualizing it. "Straight ahead is a big, recessed well in the center of the building that goes 2 stories underground. To your left is a metal walkway with railings." "I see it." "Go along the walkway." "I'm going." Faintly, the radio carried the clang of his footsteps on metal. "After you go 20 or 30 feet, you will see another walkway going right." "I see it," Grant said. "Follow that walkway." "Okay." "As you continue," Wu said, "you will come to a ladder on your left, going down into the pit." "I see it." "Go down the ladder." There was a long pause. Wu ran his fingers through his damp hair. Muldoon frowned tensely. "Okay, I'm down the ladder," Grant said. "Good," Wu said. "Now, straight ahead of you should be 2 large yellow tanks that are marked flammable. They say inflammable, and then something underneath in Spanish. Those are the ones," Wu said. "Those are the 2 fuel tanks for the generator. One of them has been run dry, and so we have to switch over to the other. If you look at the bottom of the tanks, you'll see a white pipe coming out." 4-inch PVC? "Yes, PVC. Follow that pipe as it goes back." "Okay, I'm following it." "Ow! What happened?" "Nothing, I hit my head." There was a pause. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, fine, just hurt my head. Stupid." "Keep following the pipe." Okay, Grant said. He sounded irritable. "Okay, the pipe goes to a big aluminum box with air vents in the sides. It says Honda. It looks like the generator." "Yes," Wu said, "that's the generator. If you walk around to the side, you'll see a panel with 2 buttons." "I see them. Yellow and red?" "That's right," Wu said. "Press the yellow one first, and while you hold it down, press the red one." "Right." There was another pause. It lasted almost a minute. Wu and Muldoon looked at each other. "Alan?" "It didn't work," Grant said. "Did you hold down the yellow first and then press the red?" Wu asked. "Yes, I did," Grant said. He sounded annoyed. "I did exactly what you told me to do. There was a hum, and then a click, click, click very fast, and then the hum stopped, and nothing after that." "Try it again." "I already did," Grant said. "It didn't work." "Okay, just a minute." Wu frowned. "It sounds like the generator is trying to fire up, but it can't for some reason." "Alan?" "I'm here." "Go around to the back of the generator to where the plastic pipe runs in." "Okay." A pause. Then Grant said, "The pipe goes into a round black cylinder that looks like a fuel pump." "That's right," Wu said. "That's exactly what it is. It's the fuel pump. Look for a little valve at the top." A valve? It should be sticking up at the top with a little metal tab that you can turn. I found it, but it's on the side, not the top. Okay, twist it open. Air is coming out. Good, wait until... Now liquid is coming out, it smells like gas. Okay, close the valve. Wu turned to Muldoon, shaking his head. Pump lost its prime. Alan? Yes? Try the buttons again. A moment later, Wu heard the faint coughing and sputtering as the generator turned over, and then the steady chugging sound as it caught. It's on, Grant said. Good work, Alan, good work. Now what? Grant said. He sounded flat, dull. The lights haven't even come on in here. Go back to the control room, and I'll talk you through restoring the systems manually. That's what I have to do now? Yes. Okay, Grant said. I'll call you when I get there. There was a final hiss and silence. Alan? The radio was dead. Tim went through the swinging doors at the back of the dining room and entered the kitchen. A big stainless steel table in the center of the room, a big stove with lots of burners to the left, and beyond that, big walk-in refrigerators. Tim started opening the refrigerators, looking for ice cream. Smoke came out in the humid air as he opened each one. How come the stove is on? Lex said, releasing his hand. It's not on. They all have little blue flames. Those are pilot lights. What are pilot lights? They had an electric stove at home. Never mind, Tim said, opening another refrigerator, but it means I can cook you something. In this next refrigerator, he found all kinds of stuff. Cartons of milk and piles of vegetables and a stack of T-bone steaks. Fish. You still want ice cream? I told you, didn't I? The next refrigerator was huge. A stainless steel door with a wide horizontal handle. He tugged on the handle, pulled it open, and saw a walk-in freezer. It was a whole room, and it was freezing cold. Timmy, will you wait a minute? He said, annoyed. I'm trying to find your ice cream. Timmy, something's here. She was whispering, and for a moment the last two words didn't register. Then Tim hurried back out of the freezer, seeing the edge of the door wreathed in glowing green smoke. Lex stood by the steel work table. She was looking back to the kitchen door. He heard a low hissing sound, like a very large snake. The sound rose and fell softly. It was hardly audible. It might even be the wind. But he somehow knew it wasn't. Timmy, she whispered, I'm scared. He crept forward to the kitchen door and looked out. In the darkened dining room, he saw the orderly green rectangular pattern of the tabletops. And moving smoothly among them, silent as a ghost, except for the hissing of its breath, was a velociraptor. In the darkness of the maintenance room, Grant felt along the pipes, moving back toward the ladder. It was difficult to make his way in the dark, and somehow he found the noise of the generator disorienting. He came to the ladder, and it started back up, when he realized there was something else in the room besides generator noise. Grant paused, listening. It was a man shouting. It sounded like Gennaro. Where are you? Grant shouted. Over here, Gennaro said. In the truck. Grant couldn't see any truck. He squinted in the darkness. He looked out of the corner of his eye. He saw green, glowing shapes, moving in the darkness. Then he saw the truck, and he turned toward it. Tim found the silence chilling. The velociraptor was 6 feet tall and powerfully built, although its strong legs and tail were hidden by the tables. Tim could see only the muscular upper torso, the two forearms held tightly alongside the body, the claws dangling. He could see the iridescent speckled pattern on the back. The velociraptor was alert. As it came forward, it looked from side to side, moving its head with abrupt, bird-like jerks. The head also bobbed up and down as it walked, and the long, straight tail dipped, which heightened the impression of a bird. A gigantic, silent bird of prey. The dining room was dark, but apparently the raptor could see well enough to move steadily forward. From time to time it would bend over, lowering its head below the tables. Tim heard a rapid sniffing sound. Then the head would snap up, alertly, jerking back and forth like a bird's. Tim watched until he was sure the velociraptor was coming toward the kitchen. Was it following their scent? All the books said dinosaurs had a poor sense of smell, but this one seemed to do just fine. Anyway, what did books know? Here was the real thing. Coming toward him. He ducked back into the kitchen. Is something out there? Lex said. Tim didn't answer. He pushed her under a table in the corner behind a large waste bin. He leaned close to her and whispered fiercely, Stay here! And then he ran for the refrigerator. He grabbed a handful of cold steaks and hurried back to the door. He quietly placed the first of the steaks on the floor, then moved back a few steps and put down the second. Through his goggles, he saw Lex peeping around the bin. He waved her back. He placed the third steak and the fourth, moving deeper into the kitchen. The hissing was louder, and then the clawed hand gripped the door, and the big head peered cautiously around. The velociraptor paused at the entrance to the kitchen. Tim stood in a half-crouch at the back of the room near the far leg of the steel work table, but he had not had time to conceal himself. His head and shoulders still protruded over the tabletop. He was in clear view of the velociraptor. Slowly, Tim lowered his body, sinking beneath the table. The velociraptor jerked its head around, looking directly at Tim. Tim froze. He was still exposed, but he thought, "Don't move." The velociraptor stood motionless in the doorway, sniffing. "It's darker here," Tim thought. "He can't see so well. It's making him cautious." But now he could smell the musty odor of the big reptile, and through his goggles, he saw the dinosaur silently yawn, throwing back its long snout, exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The velociraptor stared forward again, jerking its head from side to side. The big eyes swiveled in the bony sockets. Tim felt his heart pounding. Somehow it was worse to be confronted by an animal like this in a kitchen instead of the open forest. The size, the quick movements, the pungent odor, the hissing breath. Up close, it was a much more frightening animal than the tyrannosaur. The tyrannosaur was huge and powerful, but it wasn't especially smart. The velociraptor was man-sized, and it was clearly quick and intelligent. Tim feared the searching eyes almost as much as the sharp teeth. The velociraptor sniffed. It stepped forward, moving directly toward Lex. It must smell her somehow. Tim's heart thumped. The velociraptor stopped. It bent over slowly. He's found the steak. Tim wanted to bend down to look below the table, but he didn't dare move. He stood frozen in a half-crouch, listening to the crunching sound. The dinosaur was eating it, bones and all. The raptor raised its slender head and looked around. It sniffed. It saw the second steak. It moved quickly forward. It bent down. Silence. The raptor didn't eat it. The head came back up. Tim's legs burned from the crouch, but he didn't move. Why hadn't the animal eaten the second steak? A dozen ideas flashed through his mind. It didn't like the taste of beef. It didn't like the coldness. It didn't like the fact that the meat wasn't alive. It smelled a trap. It smelled Lex. It smelled Tim. It saw Tim. The velociraptor moved very quickly now. It found the third steak, dipped its head, looked up again, and moved on. Tim held his breath. The dinosaur was now just a few feet from him. Tim could see the small twitches in the muscles of the flanks. He could see the crusted blood on the claws of the hand. He could see the fine pattern of striations within the spotted pattern, and the folds of skin in the neck below the jaw. The velociraptor sniffed. It jerked its head and looked right at Tim. Tim nearly gasped with fright. Tim's body was rigid, tense. He watched as the reptile eye moved, scanning the room. Another sniff. "He's got me," Tim thought. Then the head jerked back to look forward, and the animal went on toward the fifth steak. Tim thought, "Lex, please don't move. Please don't move. Whatever you do, please don't..." The velociraptor sniffed the steak and moved on. It was now at the open door to the freezer. Tim could see the smoke billowing out, curling along the floor toward the animal's feet. One big clawed foot lifted, then came down again silently. The dinosaur hesitated. "Too cold," Tim thought. "He won't go in there. It's too cold. He won't go in. He won't go in. He won't go in." The dinosaur went in. The head disappeared, then the body, then the stiff tail. Tim sprinted, flinging his weight against the stainless steel door of the locker, slamming it shut. It slammed on the tip of the tail. The door wouldn't shut. The velociraptor roared, a terrifying loud sound. Inadvertently, Tim took a step back. The tail was gone. He slammed the door shut and heard it click. Closed! "Lex! Lex!" he was screaming. He heard the raptor pounding against the door, felt it thumping the steel. He knew there was a flat steel knob inside, and if the raptor hit that, it would knock the door open. They had to get the door locked. "Lex!" Lex was by his side. "What do you want?" Tim leaned against the horizontal door handle, holding it shut. "There's a pin! A little pin! Get the pin!" The velociraptor roared like a lion, the sound muffled by the thick steel. It crashed its whole body against the door. "I can't see anything!" Lex shouted. The pin was dangling beneath the door handle, swinging on a little metal chain. "It's right there!" "I can't see it!" she screamed. And then Tim realized she wasn't wearing the goggles. Feel for it! He saw her little hand reaching up, touching his, groping for the pin, and with her so close to him he could feel how frightened she was, her breath in little panicky gasps as she felt for the pin, and the velociraptor slammed against the door, and it opened. God, it opened! But the animal hadn't expected that, and had already turned back for another try, and Tim slammed the door shut again. Lex scrambled back, reached up in the darkness. "I have it!" Lex cried, clutching the pin in her hand, and she pushed it through the hole. It slid out again. "From the top! Put it in from the top!" She held it again, lifting it on the chain, swinging it over the handle and down into the hole. Locked! The velociraptor roared. Tim and Lex stepped back from the door as the dinosaur slammed into it again. With each impact, the heavy steel wall hinges creaked, but they held. Tim didn't think the animal could possibly open the door. The raptor was locked in. He gave a long sigh. "Let's go," he said. He took her hand, and they ran. "You should have seen them," Gennaro said as Grant led him back out of the maintenance building. "There must have been 24 of them, compies. I had to crawl into the truck to get away from them. They were all over the windshield, just squatting there, waiting like buzzards. But they ran away when you came over." "Scavengers," Grant said. "They won't attack anything that's moving or looks strong. They attack things that are dead, or almost dead. Anyway, unmoving." They were going up the ladder now, back toward the entrance door. "What happened to the raptor that attacked you?" Grant said. "I don't know," Gennaro said. "Did it leave?" "I didn't see. I got away, I think because it was injured. I think Muldoon shot it in the leg and it was bleeding while it was in here. Then, I don't know. Maybe it went back outside. Maybe it died in here. I didn't see." "And maybe it's still in here," Grant said. Wu stared out the lodge window at the raptors beyond the fence. They still seemed playful, making mock attacks at Ellie. The behavior had continued for a long time now, and it occurred to him that it might be too long. It almost seemed as if they were trying to keep Ellie's attention, in the same way that she was trying to keep theirs. The behavior of the dinosaurs had always been a minor consideration for Wu, and rightly so. Behavior was a second-order effect of DNA, like protein enfolding. You couldn't really predict behavior, and you couldn't really control it, except in very crude ways, like making an animal dependent on a dietary substance by withholding an enzyme. But in general, behavioral effects were simply beyond the reach of understanding. You couldn't look at a DNA sequence and predict behavior. It was impossible. And that had made Wu's DNA work purely empirical. It was a matter of tinkering, the way a modern workman might repair an antique grandfather clock. You were dealing with something out of the past, something constructed of ancient materials and following ancient rules. You couldn't be certain why it worked as it did. And it had been repaired and modified many times already by forces of evolution over eons of time. So, like the workman who makes an adjustment and then sees if the clock runs any better, Wu would make an adjustment and then see if the animals behaved any better. And he only tried to correct gross behavior, uncontrolled butting of the electrical fences or rubbing the skin raw on tree trunks. Those were the behaviors that sent him back to the drawing board. And the limits of his science had left him with a mysterious feeling about the dinosaurs in the park. He was never sure, never really sure at all, whether the behavior of the animals was historically accurate or not. Were they behaving as they really had in the past? It was an open question, ultimately unanswerable. And though Wu would never admit it, the discovery that the dinosaurs were breeding represented a tremendous validation of his work. A breeding animal was demonstrably effective in a fundamental way. It implied that Wu had put all the pieces together correctly. He had recreated an animal millions of years old with such precision that the creature could even reproduce itself. But still, looking at the raptors outside, he was troubled by the persistence of their behavior. Raptors were intelligent, and intelligent animals got bored quickly. Intelligent animals also formed plans, and... Harding came out into the hallway from Malcolm's room. "Where's Ellie?" "Still outside. Better get her in. The raptors have left the skylight." "When?" Wu said, moving to the door. "Just a moment ago," Harding said. Wu threw open the front door. "Ellie! Inside, now!" She looked over at him, puzzled. "There's no problem. Everything's under control. Now!" She shook her head. "I know what I'm doing," she said. "Now, Ellie, damn it!" Muldoon didn't like Wu standing there with the door open, and he was about to say so when he saw a shadow descend from above, and he realized at once what had happened. Wu was yanked bodily out the door, and Muldoon heard Ellie screaming. Muldoon got to the door and looked out and saw that Wu was lying on his back. his body already torn open by the big claw, and the raptor was jerking its head, tugging at Wu's intestines, even though Wu was still alive, still feebly reaching up with his hands to push the big head away. He was being eaten while he was still alive. And then Ellie stopped screaming and started to run alongside the inside of the fence, and Muldoon slammed the door shut, dizzy with horror. It had happened so fast. Harding said, "He jumped down from the roof." Muldoon nodded. He went to the window and looked out, and he saw that the 3 raptors outside the fence were now running away. But they weren't following Ellie. They were going back, toward the visitor center. Grant came to the edge of the maintenance building and peered forward in the fog. He could hear the snarls of the raptors, and they seemed to be coming closer. Now he could see their bodies running past him. They were going to the visitor center. He looked back at Gennaro. Gennaro shook his head. No. Grant leaned close and whispered in his ear, "No choice. We've got to turn on the computer." Grant set out in the fog. After a moment, Gennaro followed. Ellie didn't stop to think. When the raptors dropped inside the fence to attack Wu, she just turned and ran as fast as she could toward the far end of the lodge. There was a space 15 feet wide between the fence and the lodge. She ran, not hearing the animals pursuing her, just hearing her own breath. She rounded the corner, saw a tree growing by the side of the building, and leapt, grabbing a branch, swinging up. She didn't feel panic. She felt a kind of exhilaration as she kicked and saw her legs rise up in front of her face, and she hooked her legs over a branch farther up, tightened her gut, and pulled up quickly. She was already 12 feet off the ground, and the raptors still weren't following her, and she was beginning to feel pretty good when she saw the first animal at the base of the tree. Its mouth was bloody, and bits of stringy flesh hung from its jaws. She continued to go up fast, hand over hand, just reaching and going, and she could almost see the top of the building. She looked down again. The 2 raptors were climbing the tree. Now she was at the level of the rooftop. She could see the gravel only 4 feet away, and the glass pyramids of the skylight sticking up in the mist. There was a door on the roof. She could get inside. In a single heaving effort, she flung herself through the air and landed sprawling on the gravel. She scraped her face, but somehow the only sensation was exhilaration, as if it were a kind of game she was playing, a game she intended to win. She ran for the door that led to the stairwell. Behind her, she could hear the raptors shaking the branches of the tree. They were still in the tree. She reached the door and twisted the knob. The door was locked. It took a moment for the meaning of that to cut through her euphoria. The door was locked. She was on the roof, and she couldn't get down. The door was locked. She pounded on the door in frustration, and then she ran for the far side of the roof, hoping to see a way down. But there was only the green outline of the swimming pool through the blowing mist. All around the pool was concrete decking. 10, 12 feet of concrete, too much for her to jump across. No other trees to climb down, no stairs, no fire escape, nothing. Ellie turned back and saw the raptors jumping easily to the roof. She ran to the far end of the building, hoping there might be another door there, but there wasn't. The raptors came slowly toward her, stalking her, slipping silently among the glass pyramids. She looked down. The edge of the pool was 10 feet away, too far. The raptors were closer, starting to move apart, and illogically she thought, isn't this always the way? Some little mistake screws it all up. She still felt giddy, still felt exhilaration, and she somehow couldn't believe these animals were going to get her. She couldn't believe that now her life was going to end like this. It didn't seem possible. She was enveloped in a kind of protective cheerfulness. She just didn't believe it would happen. The raptors snarled. Ellie backed away, moving to the far end of the roof. She took a breath, and then began to sprint toward the edge. As she raced toward the edge, she saw the swimming pool, and she knew it was too far away, but she thought, what the hell? And leapt into space, and fell. And with a stinging shock, she felt herself enveloped in coldness. She was underwater. She had done it. She came to the surface and looked up at the roof, and saw the raptors looking down at her, and she knew that if she could do it, the raptors could do it too. She splashed in the water and thought, can raptors swim? But she was sure they could. They could probably swim like crocodiles. The raptors turned away from the edge of the roof, and then she heard Harding calling, Sattler! And she realized he had opened the roof door. The raptors were going toward him. Hurriedly, she climbed out of the pool and ran toward the lodge. Harding had gone up the steps of the roof 2 at a time, and he had flung open the door without thinking. Sattler! He shouted, and then he stopped. Mist blew among the pyramids on the roof. The raptors were not in sight. Sattler! He was so preoccupied with Sattler that it was a moment before he realized his mistake. He should be able to see the animals, he thought. In the next instant, the clawed forearm smashed around the side of the door, catching him in the chest with a tearing pain, and it took all of his effort to pull himself backward and close the door on the arm, and from downstairs he heard Muldoon shouting, "She's here! She's already inside!" From the other side of the door, the raptor snarled, and Harding slammed the door again, and the claws pulled back, and he closed the door with a metallic clang, and sank, coughing, to the floor.
Where are we going?
Lex said. They were on the second floor of the visitor center. A glass-walled corridor ran the length of the building.
To the control room, Tim said. Where's that? Down here someplace.
Tim looked at the names stenciled on the doors as he went past them. These seemed to be offices. Park warden, guest services, general manager, controller. They came to a glass partition marked with a sign, "Closed area, authorized personnel only beyond this point." There was a slot for a security card, but Tim just pushed the door open.
How come it opened?
"The power is out," Tim said.
Why are we going to the control room? She asked. To find a radio. We need to call somebody.
Beyond the glass door, the hallway continued. Tim remembered this area. He had seen it earlier during the tour. Lex trotted along at his side. In the distance, he heard the snarling of raptors. The animals seemed to be approaching. Then Tim heard them slamming against the glass downstairs.
They're out there, Lex whispered. Don't worry. What are they doing here? Lex said. Never mind now. Park supervisor, operations, main control. Here, Tim said. He pushed open the door.
The main control room was as he had seen it before. In the center of the room was a console with 4 chairs and 4 computer monitors. The room was entirely dark, except for the monitors, which all showed a series of colored rectangles.
So where's the radio?
Lex said. But Tim had forgotten all about a radio. He moved forward, staring at the computer screens. The screens were on. That could only mean the power must be back on. Ick, Lex said, shifting her body. What?
I was standing on somebody's ear, she said.
Tim hadn't seen a body when they came in. He looked back and saw there was just an ear lying on the floor.
That is really disgusting,
Lex said. Never mind. He turned to the monitors.
Where's the rest of him, she said. Never mind that now.
He peered closely at the monitor. There were rows of colored labels on the screen under the heading Jurassic Park System Startup.
You better not fool around with that, Timmy, she said.
Don't worry, I won't. He had seen complicated computers before, like the ones that were installed in the buildings his father worked on. Those computers controlled everything from the elevators and security to the heating and cooling systems. They looked basically like this, a lot of colored labels, but they were usually simpler to understand, and almost always there was a help label if you needed to learn about the system, but he saw no help label here. He looked again to be sure, but then he saw something else. Numerals clicking in the upper left corner of the screen. They read 10:47:22. Then Tim realized it was the time. There were only 13 minutes left for the boat, but he was more worried about the people in the lodge. There was a static crackle. He turned and saw Lex holding a radio. She was twisting the knobs and dials.
How does it work? She said. I can't make it work. Give me that. It's mine. I found it. Give it to me, Lex. I get to use it first. Lex!
Suddenly the radio crackled. "What the hell is going on?" said Muldoon's voice. Surprised, Lex dropped the radio on the floor. Grant ducked back, crouching among the palm trees. Through the mist ahead, he could see the raptors hopping and snarling and butting their heads against the glass of the visitor center. But between snarls, they would fall silent and cock their heads as if listening to something distant. And then they would make little whimpering sounds. "What are they doing?" Gennaro said. "Looks like they're trying to get into the cafeteria," Grant said. "What's in the cafeteria?" "I left the kids there," Grant said. "Can they break through that glass?" "I don't think so, no." Grant watched, and now he heard the crackle of a distant radio. And the raptors began hopping in a more agitated way. One after another, they began jumping higher and higher, until finally he saw the first of them leap lightly onto the second-floor balcony, and from there, move inside the second floor of the visitor center. In the control room on the second floor, Tim snatched up the radio which Lex had dropped. He pressed the button. "Hello? Hello?" "Is that you, Tim?" It was Muldoon's voice. "It's me, yes." "Where are you?" "In the control room. The power is on." "That's great, Tim," Muldoon said. "If someone will tell me how to turn the computer on, I'll do it." There was a silence. "Hello?" Tim said. "Did you hear me?" We have a problem about that," Muldoon said. Nobody, who is here knows how to do that. How to turn the computer on.
Tim said, "What, are you kidding? Nobody knows?" It seemed incredible.
No. A pause. I think it's something about the main grid. Turning on the main grid. You know anything about computers, Tim?
Tim stared at the screen. Lex nudged him.
"Tell him no, Timmy,"
she said. "Yes, some. I know something," Tim said.
Might as well try, Muldoon said. Nobody here knows what to do, and Grant doesn't know about computers.
"Okay," Tim said, "I'll try." He clicked off the radio and stared at the screen, studying it.
"Timmy,"
Lex said.
"you don't know what to do."
"Yes, I do."
"If you know, then do it,"
Lex said. "Just a minute." As a way to get started, he pulled the chair close to the keyboard and pressed the cursor keys. Those were the keys that moved the cursor around on the screen. But nothing happened. Then he pushed other keys. The screen remained unchanged.
"Well,"
she said.
"something's wrong,"
Tim said, frowning.
"You just don't know, Timmy,"
she said. He examined the computer again, looking at it carefully. The keyboard had a row of function keys at the top, just like a regular PC keyboard, and the monitor was big and in color, but the monitor housing was sort of unusual. Tim looked at the edges of the screen and saw lots of faint pinpoints of red light. Red light all around the borders of the screen. What could that be? He moved his finger toward the light and saw the soft red glow on his skin. He touched the screen where it said Access TNL and heard a beep. A message box flashed up saying, "You already have access. Make your selection from the main screen." A moment later, the message box disappeared, and the original screen flashed back up.
"What happened?" Lex said. "What did you do? You touched something."
Of course, he thought. He had touched the screen. It was a touch screen. The red lights around the edges must be infrared sensors. Tim had never seen such a screen, but he'd read about them in magazines. He touched Reset Revert. Instantly the screen changed. He got a new message. "The computer is now reset. Make your selection from the main screen." Over the radio, they heard the sound of raptors snarling.
"I want to see,"
Lex said. "You should try view."
"No, Lex."
"Well, I want view," she said, and before he could grab her hand, she had pressed view. The screen changed. Now the heading at the top said Subroutines View, Video Interface Environmental Watch. Other labeled boxes arrayed underneath designated video monitors at various locations in the park.
"Uh-oh," she said. "Lex, will you cut it out?" "Look," she said, "it worked. Ha!"
Around the room, the monitors showed quickly changing views of different parts of the park. Most of the images were misty gray because of the exterior fog, but one showed the outside of the lodge with a raptor on the roof, and then another switched to an image in bright sunlight showing the bow of a ship. Bright sunlight. "What was that?" Tim said, leaning forward.
"What? That picture?"
But the image had already changed, and now they were seeing the inside of the lodge, one room after another. And then he saw Malcolm lying in a bed.
"Stop it," Lex said. "I see them."
Tim touched the screen in several places and got submenus, then more submenus.
"Wait," Lex said, "you're confusing it. Will you shut up? You don't know anything about computers."
Now he had a list of monitors on the screen. One of them was marked Safari Lodge LV2-4. Another was Remote Shipboard VND. He pressed the screen several times. Video images came up on monitors around the room. One showed the bow of the supply ship and the ocean ahead. In the distance, Tim saw land, buildings along a shore and a harbor. He recognized the harbor because he had flown over it in a helicopter the day before. It was Punta Arenas. The ship seemed to be just minutes from landing. But his attention was drawn by the next screen, which showed the roof of the Safari Lodge in gray mist. The raptors were mostly hidden behind the pyramids, but their heads bobbed up and down, coming into view. And then on the third monitor, he could see inside a room. Malcolm was lying in a bed, and Ellie stood next to him. They were both looking upward. As they watched, Muldoon walked into the room and joined them, looking up with an expression of concern.
"They see us,"
Lex said. "I don't think so." The radio crackled. On the screen, Muldoon lifted the radio to his lips.
"Hello, Tim?"
"I'm here," Tim said.
We haven't got a whole lot of time," Muldoon said dully. "Better get that power grid on."
And then Tim heard the raptors snarl and saw one of the long heads duck down through the glass, briefly entering the picture from the top, snapping its jaws.
"Hurry, Timmy," Lex said. "Get the power on!"
The grid.
Tim suddenly found himself lost in a tangled series of monitor control screens as he tried to get back to the main screen. Most systems had a single button or a single command to return to the previous screen or to the main menu, but this system did not, or at least he didn't know it. Also, he was certain that help commands had been built into the system, but he couldn't find them either. And Lex was jumping up and down and shouting in his ear, making him nervous. Finally, he got the main screen back. He wasn't sure what he had done, but it was back. He paused, looking for a command.
Do something, Timmy! Will you shut up? I'm trying to get help.
He pushed Template, Main. The screen filled with a complicated diagram with interconnecting boxes and arrows. No good, no good. He pushed Common Interface. The screen shifted. Now the heading at the top said Common Interface with tiers of different labeled boxes underneath.
What's that? Lex said. Why aren't you turning on the power, Timmy?
He ignored her. Maybe help on this system was called Info. He pushed Info, and a message box appeared. Jurassic Park Common User Interface version 1.1b24. Developed by Integrated Computer Systems Incorporated, Cambridge, Mass. Project Supervisor Dennis Nedry. Chief Programmer Mike Bax. Jurassic Park Incorporated, all rights reserved.
Timmy!
Lex wailed, but he'd already pushed Find. He got another useless window. He pushed Go Back, and the screen flashed up another message window. Jurassic Park Common User Interface. Command Go Back. Cannot go back without a specific search option. See also Search, Change, Go Ahead, Find, Options, Review. On the radio, he heard Muldoon say, "How's it coming, Tim?" He didn't bother to answer. Frantic, he pushed buttons one after another. Suddenly, without warning, the main screen was back. Jurassic Park System Startup. And below it, a score of labeled boxes. He studied the screen. Electrical Main and Set Grids DNL both looked like they might have something to do with the grids. He noticed that Safety/Health and Critical Locks might be important too. He heard the growl of the raptors. He had to make a choice. He pressed Set Grids DNL and groaned when he saw the resulting readout. Rows of labeled boxes and figures under two main box headings, Custom Parameters and Standard Parameters. He didn't know what to do. He pushed Standard Parameters and got another screen. Standard Parameters, Park Grids B4-C6, Outer Grids C2-D2, Zoological Grids BB-07, Pen Grids R4-R4, Lodge Grids F4-D4, Maint Grids E5-L6, Main Grids C4-G7, Sensor Grids D5-G4, Utility Grids AH-B5, Core Grids A1-C1, Circuit Integrity Not Tested, Security Grids Remain Automatic. Tim shook his head in frustration. It took him a moment to realize that he had just gotten valuable information. He now knew the grid coordinates for the Lodge. He pushed Grid F4, and the screen flashed, Power Grid F4, Safari Lodge. Command cannot be executed. Error-505. Power incompatible with command error. Refer manual pages 4.09 to 4.11.
It's not working,
Lex said. I know. He pushed another button. The screen flashed again. Power Grid D4, Safari Lodge. Command cannot be executed. Error-505. Power incompatible with command error. Refer manual pages 4.09 to 4.11. Tim tried to stay calm, to think it through. For some reason, he was getting a consistent error message whenever he tried to turn on a grid. It was saying the power was incompatible with the command he was giving. But what did that mean? Why was power incompatible?
Timmy,
Lex said, tugging at his arm. Not now, Lex.
Yes, now,
she said, and she pulled him away from the screen in the console, and then he heard the snarling of raptors. It was coming from the hallway. In the skylight above Malcolm's bed, the raptors had almost bitten through the second metal bar. They could now poke their heads entirely through the shattered glass and lunge and snarl at the people below. Then after a moment they would pull back and resume chewing on the metal. Malcolm said, "It won't be long now. 3-4 minutes." He pressed the button on the radio. "Tim, are you there? Tim?" There was no answer. Tim slipped out the door and saw the velociraptor down at the far end of the corridor, standing by the balcony. He stared in astonishment. How had it gotten out of the freezer? Then as he watched, a second raptor suddenly appeared on the balcony, and he understood. The raptor hadn't come from the freezer at all. It had come from outside. It had jumped from the ground below. The second raptor landed silently, perfectly balanced on the railing. Tim couldn't believe it. The big animal had jumped 10 feet straight up. More than 10 feet. Their legs must be incredibly powerful. Lex whispered, "I thought you said they couldn't—" Shh. Tim was trying to think, but he watched with a kind of fascinated dread as the third raptor leapt to the balcony. The animals milled aimlessly in the corridor for a moment, and then they began to move forward in single file, coming toward him and Lex. Quietly, Tim pushed against the door at his back to re-enter the control room, but the door was stuck. He pushed harder.
"We're locked out,"
Lex whispered.
"Look!"
She pointed to the slot for the security card alongside the door. A bright red dot glowed. Somehow the security doors had been activated.
"You idiot, you locked us out!"
Tim looked down the corridor. He saw several more doors, but each had a red light glowing alongside. That meant all the doors were locked. There was nowhere they could go. Then he saw a slumped shape on the floor at the far end of the corridor. It was a dead guard. A white security card was clipped to his belt. "Come on," he whispered. They ran for the guard. Tim got the card and turned back, but of course the raptors had seen them. They snarled and blocked the way back to the control room. They began to spread out, fanning out in the hallway to surround Tim and Lex. Their heads began to duck rhythmically. They were going to attack. Tim did the only thing he could do. Using the card, he opened the nearest door off the hallway and pushed Lex through. As the door began to close slowly behind them, the raptors hissed and charged. Lodge. Ian Malcolm drew each breath as if it might be his last. He watched the raptors with dull eyes. Harding took his blood pressure, frowned, took it again. Ellie Sattler was wrapped in a blanket, shivering and cold. Muldoon sat on the floor, propped against the wall. Hammond was staring upward, not speaking. They all listened to the radio. "What happened to Tim?" Hammond said. "Still no word?" "I don't know." Malcolm said, "Ugly, aren't they? Truly ugly." Hammond shook his head. "Who could have imagined it would turn out this way?" Ellie said, "Apparently Malcolm did." "I didn't imagine it," Malcolm said. "I calculated it." Hammond sighed. "No more of this, please. He's been saying I told you so for hours, but nobody wanted this to happen." "It isn't a matter of wanting it or not," Malcolm said, eyes closed. He spoke slowly through the drugs. "It's a matter of what you think you can accomplish. When the hunter goes out in the rainforest to seek food for his family, does he expect to control nature? No. He imagines that nature is beyond him, beyond his understanding, beyond his control. Maybe he prays to nature, to the fertility of the forest that provides for him. He prays because he knows he doesn't control it. He's at the mercy of it. But you decide you won't be at the mercy of nature. You decide you'll control nature. And from that moment on, you're in deep trouble because you can't do it. Yet you have made systems that require you to do it. And you can't do it. And you never have. And you never will. Don't confuse things. You can make a boat, but you can't make the ocean. You can make an airplane, but you can't make the air. Your powers are much less than your dreams of reason would have you believe." "He's lost me," Hammond said with a sigh. "Where did Tim go? He seems such a responsible boy." "I'm sure he's trying to get control of the situation," Malcolm said, "like everybody else. And Grant, too. What happened to Grant?" Grant reached the rear door to the visitor center, the same door he had left 20 minutes before. He tugged on the handle. It was locked. Then he saw the little red light. The security doors were reactivated. Damn! He ran around to the front of the building and went through the shattered front doors into the main lobby, stopping by the guard desk where he had been earlier. He could hear the dry hiss of his radio. He went to the kitchen, looking for the kids, but the kitchen door was open, the kids gone. He went upstairs, but came to the glass panel marked closed area, and the door was locked. He needed a security card to go farther. Grant couldn't get in. From somewhere inside the hallway, he heard the raptors snarling. The leathery reptile skin touched Tim's face. The claws tore his shirt, and Tim fell onto his back, shrieking in fright. "Timmy!" Lex yelled. Tim scrambled to his feet again. The baby velociraptor perched on his shoulder, chirping and squeaking in panic. Tim and Lex were in the white nursery. There were toys on the floor, a rolling yellow ball, a doll, a plastic rattle.
"It's the baby raptor,"
Lex said, pointing to the animal gripping Tim's shoulder.
The little raptor burrowed its head into Tim's neck. The poor thing was probably starving, Tim thought. Lex came closer, and the baby hopped onto her shoulder. It rubbed against her neck.
Why is it doing that, she said. Is it scared?
I don't know, Tim said. She passed the raptor back to Tim. The baby was chirping and squeaking and hopping up and down on his shoulder excitedly. It kept looking around, head moving quickly. No doubt about it, the little thing was worked up and...
Tim,
Lex whispered. The door to the hallway hadn't closed behind them after they had entered the nursery. Now the big velociraptors were coming through. First one, then a second one. Clearly agitated, the baby chirped and bounced on Tim's shoulder. Tim knew he had to get away. Maybe the baby would distract them. After all, it was a baby raptor. He plucked the little animal from his shoulder and threw it across the room. The baby scurried between the legs of the adults. The first raptor lowered its snout, sniffed at the baby delicately. Tim took Lex's hand and pulled her deeper into the nursery. He had to find a door, a way to get out. There was a high, piercing shriek. Tim looked back to see the baby in the jaws of the adult. A second velociraptor came forward and tore at the limbs of the infant, trying to pull it from the mouth of the first. The two raptors fought over the baby as it squealed. Blood splattered in large drops onto the floor.
They ate him,
Lex said. The raptors fought over the remains of the baby, rearing back and butting heads. Tim found a door. It was unlocked, and went through, pulling Lex after him. They were in another room, and from the deep green glow, he realized it was a deserted DNA extraction laboratory, the rows of stereo microscopes abandoned, the high-resolution screens showing frozen, giant black-and-white images of insects. The flies and gnats that had bitten dinosaurs millions of years ago, sucking the blood that now had been used to recreate dinosaurs in the park. They ran through the laboratory, and Tim could hear the snorts and snarls of the raptors pursuing them, coming closer. And then he went to the back of the lab and through a door that must have had an alarm, because in the narrow corridor, an intermittent siren sounded shrilly, and the lights overhead flashed on and off. Running down the corridor, Tim was plunged into darkness, then light again, then darkness. Over the sound of the alarm, he heard the raptors snort as they pursued him. Lex was whimpering and moaning. Tim saw another door ahead, with a blue biohazard sign, and he slammed into the door and moved beyond it. And suddenly he collided with something big, and Lex shrieked in terror. "Take it easy, kids," a voice said. Tim blinked in disbelief. Standing above him was Dr. Grant, and next to him was Mr. Gennaro. Outside in the hallway, it had taken Grant nearly 2 minutes to realize that the dead guard down in the lobby probably had a security card. He'd gone back and gotten it, and entered the upper corridor, moving quickly down the hallway. He had followed the sound of the raptors and found them fighting in the nursery. He was sure the kids would have gone to the next room and had immediately run to the extractions lab, and there he'd met the kids. Now the raptors were coming toward them. The animals seemed momentarily hesitant, surprised by the appearance of more people. Grant pushed the kids into Gennaro's arms and said, "Take them back someplace safe, but through there," Grant said, pointing over his shoulder to a far door. "Take them to the control room if you can. You should all be safe there." "What are you going to do?" Gennaro said. The raptors stood near the door. Grant noticed that they waited until all the animals were together, and then they moved forward as a group, pack hunters. He shivered. "I have a plan," Grant said. "Now go on." Gennaro led the kids away. The raptors continued slowly toward Grant, moving past the supercomputers, past the screens that still blinked endless sequences of computer-deciphered code. The raptors came forward without hesitation, sniffing the floor, repeatedly ducking their heads. Grant heard the door click behind him and glanced over his shoulder. Everybody was standing on the other side of the glass door watching him. Gennaro shook his head. Grant knew what it meant. There was no door to the control room beyond. Gennaro and the kids were trapped in there. It was up to him now. Grant moved slowly, edging around the laboratory, leading the raptors away from Gennaro and the kids. He could see another door nearer the front, which was marked to laboratory, whatever that meant. He had an idea, and he hoped he was right. The door had a blue biohazard sign. The raptors were coming closer. Grant turned and slammed into the door and moved beyond it into a deep, warm silence. He turned. Yes! He was where he wanted to be, in the hatchery, beneath infrared lights, long tables with rows of eggs, and a low, clinging mist. The rockers on the tables clicked and whirred in a steady motion. The mist poured over the sides of the tables and drifted to the floor, where it disappeared, evaporated. Grant ran directly to the rear of the hatchery, into a glass-walled laboratory with ultraviolet light. His clothing glowed blue.
He looked around at the glass reagents, beakers full of pipettes, glass dishes, all delicate laboratory equipment. The raptors entered the room, cautiously at first, sniffing the humid air, looking at the long, rocking tables of eggs. The lead animal wiped its bloody jaws with the back of its forearm. Silently, the raptors passed between the long tables. The animals moved through the room in a coordinated way, ducking from time to time to peer beneath the tables. They were looking for him. Grant crouched and moved to the back of the laboratory, looked up, and saw the metal hood marked with a skull and crossbones. A sign said, "Caution, biogenic toxins, A4 precautions required." Grant remembered that Regis had said they were powerful poisons. Only a few molecules would kill instantaneously. The hood lay flush against the surface of the lab table. Grant could not slip his hand under it. He tried to open it, but there was no door, no handle, no way that he could see. Grant rose slowly and glanced back at the main room. The raptors were still moving among the tables. He turned to the hood. He saw an odd metal fixture sunk into the surface of the table. It looked like an outdoor electrical outlet with a round cover. He flipped up the cover, saw a button, pressed it. With a soft hiss, the hood slid upward to the ceiling. He saw glass shelves above him, and rows of bottles marked with a skull and crossbones. He peered at the labels: CCK-55, tetra-alpha-secretin, Thym11X-1612. The fluids glowed pale green in the ultraviolet light. Nearby he saw a glass dish with syringes in it. The syringes were small, each containing a tiny amount of green glowing fluid. Crouched in the blue darkness, Grant reached for the dish of syringes. The needles on the syringes were capped in plastic. He removed one cap, pulling it off with his teeth. He looked at the thin needle. He moved forward, toward the raptors. He had devoted his whole life to studying dinosaurs. Now he would see how much he really knew. Velociraptors were small, carnivorous dinosaurs, like oviraptors and dromaeosaurs, animals that were long thought to steal eggs. Just as certain modern birds ate the eggs of other birds, Grant had always assumed that velociraptors would eat dinosaur eggs if they could. He crept forward to the nearest egg table in the hatchery. Slowly he reached up into the mist and took a large egg from the rocking table. The egg was almost the size of a football, cream-colored with faint pink speckling. He held the egg carefully while he stuck the needle through the shell and injected the contents of the syringe. The egg glowed faint blue. Grant bent down again. Beneath the table, he saw the legs of the raptors and the mist pouring down from the tabletops. He rolled the glowing egg along the floor toward the raptors. The raptors looked up, hearing the faint rumble as the egg rolled, and jerked their heads around. Then they resumed their slow, stalking search. The egg stopped several yards from the nearest raptor. Damn! Grant did it all again, quietly reaching up for an egg, bringing it down, injecting it, and rolling it toward the raptors. This time, the egg came to rest by the foot of one velociraptor. It rocked gently, clicking against the big toe claw. The raptor looked down in surprise at this new gift. It bent over and sniffed the glowing egg. It rolled the egg with its snout along the floor for a moment, and ignored it. The velociraptor stood upright again and slowly moved on, continuing to search. It wasn't working. Grant reached for a third egg and injected it with a fresh syringe. He held the glowing egg in his hands and rolled it again. But he rolled this one fast, like a bowling ball. The egg rattled across the floor loudly. One of the animals heard the sound, ducked down, saw it coming, and instinctively chased the moving object, gliding swiftly among the tables to intercept the egg as it rolled. The big jaws snapped down and bit into it, crushing the shell. The raptor stood, pale albumin dripping from its jaws. It licked its lips noisily and snorted. It bit again and lapped the egg from the floor. But it didn't seem to be in the least distressed. It bent over to eat again from the broken egg. Grant looked down to see what would happen. From across the room, the raptor saw him. It was looking right at him. The velociraptor snarled menacingly. It moved toward Grant, crossing the room in long, incredibly swift strides. Grant was shocked to see it happening and froze in panic, when suddenly the animal made a gasping, gurgling sound, and the big body pitched forward onto the ground. The heavy tail thumped the floor in spasms. The raptor continued to make choking sounds, punctuated by intermittent loud shrieks. Foam bubbled from its mouth. The head flopped back and forth, the tail slammed and thumped. That's one, Grant thought. But it wasn't dying very fast. It seemed to take forever to die. Grant reached up for another.